Dear colleagues, we are only 1 minute to the beginning of the session. Today's morning session will be chaired by Tobias Lauer instead of Alessandra, who is busy at the university. And after that, they will change. There were no cancellations from this session. So, Tobias, Jeroen.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. So welcome to the second day of the conference, also from my side. So we continue today, it's session number 2, Holocene and late Quaternary fluvial archives. So first we have 5 talks, and then we have a coffee break. And yeah, I'm looking forward to this nice variety of topics. And the first talk will be by Mr. Ronchi. Sorry for the potentially wrong pronunciation. And you can share your screen now and start with your presentation. See if it works. No reaction yet.
Sorry?
Okay, now it works. Now
okay,
we can
perfect.
see you. Okay, hi, Livio.
Okay, hi. Okay, and I think now you can see my presentation. Is it right?
Yes, now we can see it. Thanks a lot.
Okay, perfect. So I'm just beginning now. Good morning, everybody. I'm Livio Ronchi from Padova University. I'm presenting this work on behalf of my colleagues. It's about the terrestrial graph and its evolution during the last glacial maximum and let's say before its submersion. But now I'm going to give you some hints, let's say, about the area. We're talking about in Italy, the Adriatic Sea. So this is the area we are talking about. The Gulf of Trieste receives the waters of a few rivers. Actually, we have just 2 of them which are quite important, and the Isonzo. This is the watershed of Isonzo with this yellow line, and the Timavo River, which is this one. This is the watershed. The thing that I want you to notice is that we have 2 main lithologies in the area. So we have the brown one, which is flysch, so it is prone to the production of sediments, and the green one, which is mainly carbonates. And this means that most of the processes that are going on these areas are dissolution processes and karstic one. This is the classical karst. So we will see that it's going to be important later, but while Isonzo have much sediments from his flysch lithologies, Timavo doesn't have many sediments, doesn't carry many sediments, and much of his path go through karstic cavities. Second thing that I want you to notice, to know actually, is that Isonzo and many of the other rivers from the southern Alps during the last glacial maximum built a megafaun, and this is the yellow. This yellow one is the megafaun of Isonzo, which has some characteristics of course. It's still visible on the modern plane, and we will see later why it's important to know this fact. So, few other things. The Gulf of Trieste was, let's say, exposed to subaerial conditions at least until 9.5 thousand years before present, due, of course, to the marine regression during the glacial maximum. And as you can see, this is a sea level rise curve, relative, of course, and from, let's say, 9,000 years before present, it was rapidly submerged. Another thing is that we don't have much tectonics going on in this region, at least there's no visible deformation for the last millennia. So going now to the data that we collected for this work, exploited two types of data. One of them, chip profiles. We will see in a bit what a chip profile looks like. They are basically an image of the subsurface. They are acoustic impedance profiles. Well, here you can see the database, or these lines here are traces, but for the Gulf, we use almost 1,500 kilometers of profiles. And these are the traces, of course, again. And this is one of them. This is VE 260, it goes from left to right, from southwest to northeast. And this line here is seafloor, and all the lines, the reflectors you can see, are typically acoustic impedance contrast. So when the contrast is high, you can see this kind of reflectors, and which usually are paleosoils or peat layers, and focusing on these kind of reflectors, and also on the seismic facies, and so the differences between the different portions of the profiles, we were able to define different units. Just to give you an idea, an example. Second, really important data that we use is our multi-beam derived DTMs. Multi-beam is a technique which allow an imaging of the seafloor, a really high detailed one. And we have two main DTMs derived from multi-beam. This one here was already published in a paper from one of our colleagues. And recently we acquired this second one, which is actually, it was provided by the Italian Navy, much smaller, but still very important work. The important thing here to notice is that already in the paper published that I just showed you, the authors recognize an ancient fluvial ridge, so with the levees and a residual channel. You can see it in here, and we have some in the insets, some magnifications, and you can really visualize the morphology of this ancient channel. And it was generically described in the previous paper as one of the rivers from the Istrian area, so this area here. And now with this newly acquired DTM, we understood that actually this channel continues, and again another magnification. So next step for us was to understand if we could extend even further the reconstruction of this channel. In order to do it, we exploited the chip profiles that I showed you before. And I'm not going to details the description of these profiles, but you can see here on the left we have the raw profiles. On the right, the line drawing, so the interpretation, and it's very visible. I would say it's very clear. You can see the residual channels. These are these deep green, and also the construction architecture of the levees. And these are from this area here. We can move a little bit to the south. Also, these chip profiles confirmed what we saw on the multi-beam DTM. And in these examples, you can really take a look to the lateral correction of this ridge. So it indicates a lateral migration, of course, and also to the upbuilding. So we're talking here. This for the scale. These are minus 20 meters, minus 30 meters here below mean sea level. You can really see also the dimensions of these kind of structures. This allowed us to produce this reconstruction, so the longitudinal profile of this ancient channel and also the plan form. So this was the part already published. We attach this area here, this portion, reaching almost 50 kilometers of length for this channel. And now we can say two things about these, two main things about discussing this feature. One of them is the provenience, the origin of this channel. Well, as you can see, this is modern Isonzo outlet here, and you can see this channel goes directly to the area where Isonzo stayed during the last glacial maximum. This means that Isonzo is probably the only candidate for the, let's say, for the responsible for the production, for the building of these fluvial ridges. And why we can rule out Timaro? Well, I told you before, Timaro doesn't really wide watershed, nor it has enough sediment production, sediment transport. So Isonzo is like the main candidate. Second thing is the interesting path that this Paleo river followed. As you can see, it goes really. It follows the modern coast of the Trieste area. There's a sharp bend, a knee in this portion, in this area near Trieste, and then again following the coast. We tried to explain this kind of behavior. Think about the physiography that that in which this river evolved. So I talked about the megafan of Isonzo before, and you have to imagine that the megafan was extended in this area over here. This means that and other important thing is that these coasts here are cliffs, rocky cliffs. This means that in our vision, our opinion, Isonzo trapped itself between its own sediment of the megafan and the cliffs of the Istrian coast. It means like there's an autogenic control of the river on its own path. Last thing is we have also some dates, again published by one of our authors. They tell us a story of soil building, soil production, which goes in 6 centimeters from the late LGMs, let's say 18,000 years before present, to the beginning of the Holocene. This means that this ancient Isonzo river was at a certain point, let's say, deactivated. The building of these levees was deactivated as Isonzo probably just moved to another area on the, to another path on the same area. So we also know that this Paleisonzo would have a LGM age. In conclusion, we managed to reconstruct the path of this ancient river for over 50 kilometers. And to our knowledge, this is probably the longest reconstruction available on the Mediterranean area, at least the submerged one. A second thing that we can conclude is that Paleisonzo, as I show you, flowed along the let's say the modern coast of Italy, Slovenia, and Croatia, and this is in contrast with the classic view for the Adriatic Sea of a mega Paleopole river, which would have collected all the waters, all the rivers from the Southern Alps and Dinaric Alps. As I just explained to you, the peculiar path of this river is probably due to an autogenic factor. So the Isonzo was trapped between the megafauna and the cliffs of the Istrian Peninsula. And the last thing is to notice, let's say, is that the rapid submersion of the Gulf allowed the outstanding conservation of this morphology, which otherwise would have been wiped out, as there's no other, to our knowledge, there's no other examples of such perfect conservation of other paleochannels. I'm done, thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Livio, for this. Thanks a lot, Livio, for this very nice, interesting talk. So, are there questions from the audience? Maybe you can just type in a queue okay, David Bridgeland is raising his hand. So, David, you have a question.
Okay, so I got in quickly there. Thank you, Tobias. Thank you, Livio.
Thanks.
And good morning, everybody. Something I forgot to say yesterday. Yes, fascinating stuff, Livio. And if I can be forgiven for making a comparison with something familiar to me, it reminded me of my very early research when one of my supervisors was someone who'd studied the offshore seismics of the Thames estuary in the southern North Sea. And having a river that essentially hugs the coast, and so that when sea level rises, one bank of the river becomes the coastline, is actually something we have in that area also, although the coastline is very different. And I've been to Trieste and I know that it's a cliffed coastline, completely different. But our river sat offshore, and in fact onshore there are terraces through the Pleistocene showing that the one bank of the river that was high, and presumably the other bank was low, and this would be the case. So your left bank becomes the coastline when the Holocene sea level rises. I'm interested to know whether this is a subsiding area, though, so that you wouldn't expect to get terrace preservation. And I think the thing with the Thames is we kind of, it's a surprise to people because they imagine that the Thames is this tiny tributary of the Rhine, and I admit that it's very insignificant compared to the Rhine. And although it follows our coastline, it followed our coastline offshore during the low stand. It eventually did join the Rhine, and after MIS 12, they did actually turn sharply through the Dover Strait and out to the southwest approaches between Britain and France. Although previously there was a big delta there, so we have a comparator with your fan as well. And certainly the North Sea Basin is a subsiding area, but it ignores that and it goes out to the southwest now. So some interesting comparisons. And but of course your seismic data is so much cleaner now than the stuff that my supervisor had to deal with, which would have been in the early 1970s, where there were far more repeats and it was all analog and it was quite tricky stuff to work up, and you had to sort of put all these strings together and plot them up. So I've taken up too much time. I'm sorry about that, but it's absolutely fascinating. Thanks very much.
Thanks to you also, because I didn't know about this. Comparing stuff on the games, and I will check out for sure. Thanks.
I can send you some literature.
Oh, thank you very much. I would enjoy it. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks a lot. So we have time for one more question at least. Is there any other question? Okay, well, I have just one question. You showed some, I think that were radiocarbon ages on your one slide that were already published by Novak et al. in 2020. Do you have the chance to get any further age constraints for this story, or so is there any other dating campaign or?
We I have to admit I'm not telling all the story because of course we have other evidences on the Gulf of Trieste, not as fascinating usually, but still nice. And we at least we have another date from a river which is more recent than this one. Mm-hmm. So yes, at least we have some other hints, but we're working on that. But yeah, some other constraints, yes, we have them.
Okay. All right. Thanks a lot again, Livio, for this nice presentation. So we can move on to the next presentation, which is given by Martin Stokes. So Martin, you can share your screen.
Morning, everybody. Just give me a second. So hopefully you should be able to see my presentation screen.
Yes, it works, thanks.
Excellent. Right, well, morning everybody. Really nice to be here with FLAG again after a few years of a gap, even if it is online. So I'm going to be talking to you about some work that is ongoing, and it's based upon some alluvial fan research, which is being undertaken in the Cape Verde Islands. And what we're particularly interested in with these alluvial fans, which are associated with volcanic islands, is their hydrological signature that's associated with these things called African humid periods. And these are elevated occurrences of hydrological activity, which affect sort of low latitudinal continental areas. And they're very well known for bringing sort of much wetter conditions to currently hyper-arid areas like the Sahara Desert. So I'm going to be talking to you about alluvial fans, and alluvial fans are really important fluvial archives, and they shouldn't be overlooked. And I think we've got some other talks later on in today's programme about alluvial fans by one of my colleagues, Anne Mather, so please go take a look at that. In this particular talk, I'm going to be talking to you about, firstly, some geochronological work, then some aspects of the flood records that we have in terms of their geomorphology and their sedimentology. And then I'll be talking to you using these data to say something about the timing of the African humid periods and the association with the floods. And the key goal is very much a work in progress, where we're going to be trying to calculate some flood discharges. The work is, just need to acknowledge a few funding bodies. So my university, Plymouth, and my colleague, Alberto Gomez, which unfortunately he couldn't be with us today, but acknowledge the University of Porto. Our geochronology has been undertaken by the University of Glasgow, SWERC facility, so thanks to them. And then I've got a series of professional bodies, QRAA, BSG, and the JOLSOC, who supported kind of sort of aspects of field work over the years. So moving on to the next slide, Cape Verde. So these are a series of volcanic islands located somewhere between 600 to 800 kilometers offshore West Africa. It's a low latitude area between 14 to 17 degrees north of the equator. The archipelago are generally volcanically inactive. Fogo down in the south here was last erupting in 2014, but the more northerly islands and Santan and Tau, which is the island I'm going to be talking to you about, the last volcanic activity was about 100,000 years ago. The islands are tectonically quiescent, so this is informed by marine terraces, which are fairly well developed around the margins of the islands, and this means that any of the kind of sort of fan activity that we look at has got a very kind of clearer climate association with it. Climatically, the islands are arid, and as you can see from the this MODIS image here on the right hand side, they're right in the kind of Sahara Desert kind of sort of dust plume area. My mouse pointer here, which hopefully you can see, is just kind of circling the Cape Verde Islands. And even though it's a dry climate today, the African humid periods, so these kind of periods of elevated hydrological activity related to precession, so the spin of and tilt of the earth, and the changes in albedo, the reflection of the Sahara Desert, has brought these dry, very much wetter conditions to this even offshore Africa area. So Santan and Tau, it's a volcanically sort of pristine island. It's got its edifice is still fairly sort of well established and remains. The northern side of the island is fairly eroded. There is a bit of an orographic effect, so it is wetter on the northern side, and you can see there's quite a marked erosional contrast taking place here. The western part of the island is subject to very large volcanic flank collapses, and then it's the southeastern side of the island where the alluvial fans of interest are, that I'm going to be talking to you about now. So we're interested in one particular fan system over here on the right hand side, Fan is about 6 kilometers long. It's got an area of about 14 square kilometers, and it's fed by a catchment of about 28 square kilometers, which kind of sort of taps into the main volcanic edifice. Topo de Coroa, which is the highest point on the island, was the location of the most recent eruption about 100,000 years ago, 1,778 meters. So you can see it's a very large amount of relief in a short distance. So just to tell you a little bit more about the fan in more detail now. So these are a series of drone images from distal through mid through to proximal parts of the alluvial fan. You can see that there's a small modern active lobe, which was the picture, the fantastic drone picture I started off with. And then there's a large relict alluvial fan surface off in the distance in mid and proximal fan areas, which is the focus of this particular study. There is quite a noticeable sea cliff currently being eroded into the toe of this kind of sort of relic fan, obviously through rising sea levels. If you move into the mid-fan setting, the expansive surface is very, very well represented here, and there's a series of deeply incised channels which cut down through this surface. So this surface is abandoned, it's disconnected from the modern hydrological drainage network, which is really important because obviously it's one of the key things that allows us to use it for flood reconstruction. Beautiful fluvial bar forms also preserved, as you can see from the drone imagery as well. In the proximal fan areas, you can see again the surface. There's a little bit of kind of tephra, which is 100,000 years old, mantling the upper part of the fan surface here. And then this is the deeply incised main active channel, which is about 100 meters deep and running through a slot canyon about 20 meters wide, bypassing this kind of sort of abandoned relic fan surface. And you can see the geomorphological relationship between the modern active channel, which kind of feeds from the catchment area, and then the abandoned surface, which is what we're interested in. So the fan surface is very much the focus of our attention, and alluvial fans are a bit like river terraces. If you ever work on them in tectonically active settings, they tend to be kind of quite terraced, and this is a single expansive surface which didn't really have any at first look, any distinct sort of depositional lobes. However, if you pay some attention, some careful attention to the fan surface, and you map out the relict drainage network from satellite imagery, you can actually start to see that there are a series of different lobes occurring. So there's a proximal lobe, and then two large mid to distal fan lobes, and then there's a couple of tributary fans coming in from the west, which we're not so interested in. So it's these three lobes which are the key to our analysis, and without this kind of drainage network analysis we wouldn't get any insight into it at all. Sedimentologically, this is what the fan surfaces look like in terms of their fluvial bar form. So as you can see, very much dominated by boulder type sort of class sizes. So from a geochronological perspective, this was work that we started off back in 2014. So because it's a volcanic island and all the clasts are basalt, we can use cosmogenic exposure dating. So we can date these depositional lobes of our fan, so the abandonment, so the formation and abandonment of these lobes. We used helium-3, which is a stable cosmogenic isotope. So it's looking at the accumulation of helium-3 through time after deposition on the fan surface. You sample the boulder tops and also the undersides. The boulder tops particularly is obviously the focus of attention. So you crush those and sieve them, and we pick the pyroxenes, and then there's some simple cleaning steps, and then you measure them in a straightforward mass spectrometer as opposed to an atomic mass spectrometer with the usual, more typically applied sort of beryllium and aluminium decay isotopes. So it's kind of quite a nice cosmogenic isotope to use in this particular instance. We've sampled about 19 sites across the fan surface so far. Our initial survey was quite simple. We went straight down the fan axis and we got 9 locations. but we subsequently resampled, and we were a little bit more sort of careful in terms of where we were sampling, so making sure that we've got different fan lobes, and then particularly within the a given lobe, making sure that we were kind of choosing boulders associated with fluvial bar forms that were kind of the most highest elevated parts of that given lobe. So the chronology that came back, as I said, we've only got 9 dates so far, and the results were really interesting. So we had the proximal lobe here was deposited mainly between 10 to 20,000 years ago, and then the 2 mid to distal fan lobes were much younger, so a 50 to 60,000 year lobe here, and then a 90 to 160,000 year lobe here. And so we've got some kind of sort of fan which is building by kind of lobe switching and avulsion, which is no great surprise. You expect fan dynamics to operate in that particular way. And it clearly seems to be that the locus of sedimentation is moving back towards the mountain front, which is fairly common with kind of rising base levels and aging fans. When you start to look at the chronology in relation to the climate changes, it's really interesting because the ages seem to cluster. They're associated with the African humid periods, but they tend to occur very early on in the African humid period. So clearly the landscape is, at least from this kind of preliminary age data set, is responding quite dramatically to these elevated rainfall conditions. For those of you who don't really know much about the African humid periods, there's a couple of papers, so Chilingi and Larassonia are key works, and these are all based upon kind of sort of marine offshore records and really high resolution climate change. So we're obviously kind of putting our fan chronologies onto that. And then these diagrams at the bottom were from the Larassonia work, showing how the climate belts kind of sort of shift. So this is the modern configuration with the hyper-arid Sahara Desert, and then the Sahel sort of savanna basically shifts into that hyper-arid zone during the African humid period, and have these kind of large mega lake occurrences and so on. So much more water around in the landscape. So the thing that we're really interested in is, can we actually get a flood sort of paleohydrological signature, and can we actually start to quantify the discharge that's built these lobes when they've avulsed and then started to form. So we've actually played around with paleohydrology quite a lot over the years, mainly on river terraces and mainly from southeastern Spain. So a couple of papers which I think have been presented in some shape or form in former flag contexts. And one of the approaches that we used was the maximum boulder size method. This works really well, particularly on fans, because obviously in this particular case we're dominated by boulders, and you need some key data requirements, so a boulder mass, boulder dimensions, so that's representing the flow depth. You need to get some channel width, channel slope measurements, and then there's obviously some challenge with this because you're talking about alluvial fans rather than kind of sort of proper channelized river systems. These are all based upon a method by Clark 1996. It's kind of like an engineering type of approach. So you need some field data, and we've essentially sampled the 3 different lobes related to those 3 different African humid periods. We've subdivided each lobe into a proximal and distal setting. We've selected some really nice fluvial bars, and then from each one of those bars for a given site, we've measured the 10 largest boulders that we can find. And then we've also got some sort of fairly old style field measurements of bar slopes and widths and so on. We've also done some field digital data collection. So we've drone mapped some of the fan surfaces. So we used a DJI Phantom 3 Pro, mapping about 200 by 200 meter areas at 50 meter elevation. And then we process these data in Agisoft Metashape, and this is great because it gives you really high resolution, kind of 10, 20 centimeter pixel DEMs and ortho images. And you can use these to actually kind of sort of measure the slopes and the widths and things, which obviously was quite nice because we also did it in the field to kind of sort of verify. What was really remarkable from the imagery was it showed that the bar morphology was quite similar. You've got these narrow ridges, and then they kind of sort of splayed out in their distal areas. And that's a consistent pattern that we saw across all sites, proximal distal, for all the different lobes. So the boulders that we measured, these were mainly medium boulders. I've used a slightly modified grain size scale here. This is Blair and McPherson, who are kind of very much fan sediment people. So medium boulders dominates, and you can see I've got numbers and numbers and numbers and different sort of tables. It's remarkably similar in terms of grain size. So the ABC, they're the ABC axes of the boulders, so long, intermediate, and short. Not much difference between the different proximal distal sites for each one of the lobes. So the table at the bottom here is kind of sort of showing you the key over the key summary. And then from the digital results, this is just one example. Obviously, we've got multiple data sets behind alongside this, but the narrow kind of ridges were about 20 meters wide, and then the splays anything up to about 60 meters wide. And then and that was consistent for all the different sites. And then we got this kind of range of 1 through to 3 degrees for the slopes. So in terms of the discharge estimates, so these are the data that we've used as inputs, and we played around with them a little bit. And then on the right-hand side of the actual results, so our floods that kind of built these African humid period avulsion lobes range from about 100 to 200 QMEX. I've kind of shown the respective AHP 1 through to 3 subdivisions down here as well, but there's really not a lot of difference between the two. So the question now is, and this is very much a work in progress, how valid are these? And you usually need some kind of sort of modern comparisons to at least kind of sort of have some kind of calibration and verification of what these discharge estimates actually mean. So we can go to the modern alluvial fan. This is much smaller in scale, but it does frequently flood once every sort of few years. And here's an example from rain that fell in December 2011, and the image that you're seeing here is just a Google Earth image from January 2012. So you can see that this small alluvial fan, at least a third of the fan is being occupied during the flood. And then you can actually pick out sort of other avulsion lobes in just by slight differences in texture and tone. So that's kind of quite similar to the pattern that we're getting, albeit at a bigger scale. We've got a lack of modern gauge data from this fluvial system, so it's quite a challenging thing to really work out how valid the results are. And obviously, you know, we're measuring from quite a restricted number of sites because this is a work in progress. There are some challenges with fans. So in terms of the width, it may just be better to measure the fan apex area. And if we did this for our fan, it's about 200 meters wide, and that takes the discharge estimates up to about 700 QMEX, so more than tripling the results. And then really you need to be using multiple hydrological methods rather than just the maximum boulder size method, which is something that we've kind of got in hand. So I'm kind of mindful of time, so I'm going to finish there. But my final slide is, as you can see, everything I've been talking about is a work in progress. But I do have a fully funded PhD studentship, which is available to kind of investigate this in more detail. And it is worthy to note that it is open to EU and international students for full funding as well. So I shall leave it there. Thank you very much.
Tobias, please switch on your microphone.
Sorry, I'm unmuted. Okay, yeah, so thanks a lot, Martin, for this very fascinating talk. We still have time for one question. So Jesse raised the hand.
Can I raise? I can't do it electronically as co-organizer.
Sure.
Can I ask? Well, thank you. Hi, Martin. You showed the surface of alluvial fans, and it was in dark color. Is it does it vanish, or it is just petrographic color of the rocks? basaltic?
There is a little bit of varnish on the rocks. So the boulders do show some weathering, and yes, there is a weathering rind, and you would expect there's not a marked variation in the varnish, so it's not like going to Death Valley where you can see different fan surfaces with different degrees of varnish formation and so on. It's quite uniform in type, and maybe it's just that there wasn't long enough and wet enough periods to create substantially different varnish colors between the different fan surfaces.
Have you managed to obtain any cosmogenic dates from the surface?
So the ages were range from 10 to 20,000 years for the proximal lobe, 50 to 60 for the southeastern lobe, and then 90 to 160,000 for the southwestern lobe. And we've got loads and loads of samples which are always waiting.
Okay, so tens of thousands of years is enough to desert varnish to be found. Okay.
Yeah. There's a whole area of debate. So the Americans say that it takes just a couple of thousand years in some instances, in fact, based upon basaltic varnishes.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot. I think we can quickly do one more question from Everton. He raised his hand. So you have to unmute yourself, please.
Thanks, Martin, for the presentation. I was just wondering if it's possible to use average denudation rates inferred from cosmogenic in order to infer the sediment input for each one of these lobes. Would that be possible?
Yes, there is a French group. There was a paper recently published in Geomorphology, Laity et al. They looked at the northern side of the island. They didn't actually look at the fan systems, but yeah, you could. So obviously, there is a big thick pile of fan sediment underneath that surface. So you could look at the variation in cosmogenic accumulation through those different layers, but obviously it'll take you back into much older African human periods, which would be really interesting.
Yes, yeah, I was just wondering, but okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks a lot. So we have to move on to the next talk, which will be given by our colleagues from Poland about macro meanders in Central Europe. So.
Okay, good morning.
Thank you, it works, yeah.
Is my presentation visible?
Yes, it is visible, thanks.
Okay. My name is Peter Kusztal. I am PhD student of geography on the Jan Kochanowski University in Poland. I would like to present macromeanders in Central Europe, a case study from the Holy Cross Mountains region.
Something is wrong with your presentation.
Excuse me. Again. In the 80s, macromeanders were identified by Szumański and Kozarski in the Warta and San valleys. These macromeanders were cut off in the late glacial, in the belling phase. In the next time, two generations of the Vistula macromeanders were identified, the deep paleochannel from the Allerette phase and the shallow paleochannel from the Younger Dryas phase. And these macromeanders were presented on the model of Upper Vistula pattern changes. For the Holocene, the Younger Dryas Vistula macromeanders were replaced by the braided river, and this transformation of the riverbed took place downstream of Krakow. All fields of Vistula macromeanders are located in one morphological level with Holocene alluvial bodies. A compilation of various results indicates that the largest sizes of meanders of different order rivers were in the late glacial. Two generations of macromeanders were identified also in the underfed Narew Valley in its narrow fluvial segment. The older generation was dated at the late glacial, and the younger generation was dated at the Pleistocene-Holocene transition. Older generation of Narew macromeanders probably existed in the Belling phase. They are paleochannels of the first stage of transformation from braided to meandering river, similar as in Warta and Maas River valleys. And younger generation of Narew macromeanders probably existed in the Allerate and Younger Dryas phases. Macromeanders were identified also in the western part of the East European plain, in the Niemen Valley, in Belarus. These are examples of Niemen macromeanders on a digital elevation model. Niemen macromeander was radiocarbon dated at the early Holocene and palynological dating at the older Dryas Allerate transition and second macromeander at the younger Dryas Preboreal transition. Similar macromeanders were identified in the Zachodnia Berezyna Valley in Belarus, and these macromeanders are very good visible on a digital elevation model. In the Holy Cross Mountains region, macromeanders were identified in the Charna-Nida Valley. This is the study site in the Charna-Nida Valley on the orthophoto map and on the geomorphological map. In this map, we can see the Charna-Nida large paleomeander and the point bar above floodplain level. This is the view of the study site in the field. On the study site, geological drillings were made, and then radiocarbon dating and palynological analysis were carried out. These analyses indicate that the Charna-Nida macromeanders existed in the late glacial, probably in the Allerate phase. These are the Charna-Nida macromeanders on the final river pattern changes model. The new study site is located on the northwest margin of the Holy Cross Mountains in the Charna-Konecka Valley. This is the view of the study site in the field. The Charna-Konecka macromeander undercut terrace and dune, and there is a pit bog plain on the sandy point bar. Radiocarbon dating indicates that the macromeander was cut off before the late Vistulian. Conclusions: macromeanders in the area of Central Europe occur in valleys of rivers of different orders, first, second, third order. Most of them developed in the late glacial. So far, macromeanders has been identified in the lowlands and in the foreland of non-glaciated mountains, and recently in the highlands in the Holy Cross Mountains region. Macromeanders in the Holy Cross Mountains region were dated at the late glacial and the younger pleniglacial on the new study site. So far, San and Charna-Konecka macromeanders are the oldest in Central Europe, and very early development of macromeanders in the Charna-Konecka Valley probably was caused by local factors. Thank you for attention.
Yeah, thanks a lot for your presentation. Really nice. So we still have plenty of time for questions. So are there any questions? So you can stop sharing your screen. Okay, Andre, it's.
Thank you much. It was a very interesting talk, especially for me, as I'm also a hunter for macromeanders, but in the region of Eastern Europe. And my question is on the chronology. As far as I remember from the old Polish works from Kazarski, Letnicki, they dated the large meanders or macromeanders mainly to Berling-Ellerud. And Younger Dryas was set as a transformation from meandering to braided channel patterns. You did, yes. And my question is first, you demonstrated the dates that are rather much older even than Berling. So your last dates from your macromeander were here. Well, in this graph, the time scale is calibrated or non-calibrated?
Calibrated, yes.
It's calibrated.
This dating is calibrated.
Calibrated, yes. And well, and the dates from the last macromeander here, yes. 14,000 uncalibrated. It is even before the start of Berling, I suppose. Yes or not? Is it the oldest macromeander in Poland? No.
Yes, in Central Europe, oldest in Central Europe, in Sun Valleys, dating at 15,000 BP, and this macromeander about 40,000 BP. Two large macromeanders is oldest in Central Europe.
Very interesting, because in East European plain we have macromeanders from 18,000, and most of them are 18 to 16,000, much older than here. And other question is, what about the Younger Dryas? You still have meandering channel pattern in Younger Dryas?
In Younger Dryas is this valley. Yes, braided river, accumulation terrace, alluvial plain. In Younger Dryas transformation river pattern, Czarnakonecka river pattern.
What's the reason of channel pattern transformation? What do you think? Why it occurred from meandering, large meanders to braided? What was the reason of this transformation?
Conditions, yes.
Yeah. What were conditions yet?
Conditions. Climatic factors.
What was the mechanism? Probably. What was the mechanism?
Mechanism.
Yeah.
Professor Tomasz Kalicki will answer the question. Please.
We have discussed it with him.
Help me.
Okay.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you. Okay, there is probably, we're looking on this why in some places the macromeander change to the braided system. Yeah, there is generally probably connected with the cooling at that time if you're looking at the palynology, and probably much more transport from the slope of the material. Therefore, in some places we have the overloaded rivers. Therefore, for example, what we present here, in some sections, really, especially near Krakow, we have this kind of situation that the downstream of Krakow, we have the braided section, but at that same time, The braided, or maybe like this, the braided was 10 kilometers downstream of Krakow, but 20 kilometers downstream, it was this very large and very shallow meanders. Peter, come back to this slide from Vistula. Much more.
This?
Not this, once more. Well, there is this braided section, there is the central part of Krakow, and there is the 10 kilometers, and then once more. Back. Once more, once more back.
Jest tak?
Nie do tyłu, Piotr, do przodu znaczy, Piotr. Jeszcze jeden.
Z włożeniami teraz mam.
Nie,
bo
ale teraz mi pokaż te
później się
przekroje przez meandry. Jeszcze raz.
Okej, już wiem.
Not here. You see, there is this also younger Dryas macro meander, but this really macro meander, very nice. But you see, if you compare the Aleret and the younger Dryas, you see there is the deep, and there is the much wider and very shallow meander. Okay, from the younger Dryas. Therefore, I think that in some sections we have the braided system. And we observe here this kind of the situation also in the smaller river, in the Czarna-Konecka river valley, but there is the I think, very good example for these changes of from point to point or from section to section at that time. It was connected with the cooling and probably with the the changes in the forest cover at that time.
So sediment load.
Sediment generally is the sediment load. Yeah,
I see.
Changes the sediment load of the river, and then we have this kind of changes.
I see. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot. We still have 4 minutes, so we can have one more question. Okay, are there any questions? Obviously not. Well, then I would say we can move on to the next talk. So we switch to our colleagues from Russia, and the next talk will be given by Ekaterina. So you can share your screen.
Yes, hello.
Hello.
Can you see the presentation?
Yeah, we can see the presentation. Thanks a lot.
Great. Okay, good morning, dear colleagues. My presentation will be about the history of the Moksha River Valley development in the late Pleistocene. And we studied, yes, it works. We studied the Moksha River Valley in its lower part between the Tsna River confluence and the mouth of the Moksha River. Moksha is a meandering channel, and on the key side, the Moksha River has a wide floodplain with large and small paleochannels on its surface. Small paleochannels have the same parameters as the modern river channel. Their width is about from 100 to 150 meters, when wavelengths is between 300 to 400 up to 600-700 meters. And large paleochannels parameters are a few times bigger. The width is about 250 to 300 meters, and wavelength is about 1,500 to 2,000 meters. So Such large macromeanders are spread globally in the temperate climate zone of the northern hemisphere. However, the East European plain is characterized by a great number of such paleochannels and their good preservation in topography of river valleys. Channel widths of macromeanders are a few times larger than the recent meanders of the same rivers. As previous studies show, such large paleochannels were formed throughout the periglacial zone of the last glaciation. These periglacial rivers were formed under conditions of high spring runoff. Formation of large paleochannels is usually associated with late glacial, the end of marine isotope stage 2. We studied both large and small paleochannels to reconstruct paleohydrology and history of the Moksha River Valley development in late Pleistocene. Large paleochannels correspond to the time of high river runoff, and the oldest ones of small paleochannels were studied to know the time of lowering of the runoff of the Moksha River in the end of late glacial. Wide floodplain and 2 levels of terraces are represented on the studied part of the Moksha River Valley. The high floodplain is from 1 to 6 meters height. The first terrace is about 9 to 11 meters, and the second terrace is from 18 to 22 meters. The width of the valley in the study area is about 14 to 16 kilometers, but sometimes it can reach more than 20 kilometers. And the width of the floodplain is about 12 to 14 kilometers, so it is the main part of the valley bottom. The main aims of our study were reconstruction of late Pleistocene history of the Moksha River Valley development and establishing of absolute chronology of paleochannels formation. In our study, we used field and laboratory methods. Boreholes in large and small paleochannels were made during the field work in August, September of 2019 and 2020. Organic material from alluvium of the river valley bottom was sampled to take radiocarbon, mostly AMS dating, to find the time of river incision and aggradation, paleochannels formation and infilling. Radiocarbon dating was done in the laboratory of radiocarbon dating and electronic microscopy of Institute of Geography of Russian Academy of Science in Moscow. Radiocarbon dates were calibrated using OxCal program and the last calibrating curve in Cal 20. Let's look closer on lithology and stratigraphy of analyzed paleochannels. Here you can see that the entire infilling of the valley is presented by interlining of different sands and loams. Usually a coarse sand that looks like channel alluvium underlies the alternation of fine sands and loams. But under coarse sand, the interline of sands and loams continues, and such situation can repeat a few times. So mostly it is unclear where the borders between different by-age alluvial layers are situated. That's why we decided to analyze 2 boreholes first, one in the big paleochannel, it is number 6, and one more in small paleochannel, number 3, to understand where the infilling of paleochannel stops and the other alluvial layers begin. We expected that the results will make it possible to determine the depth of paleochannels infillings and to find the thickness of alluvium correspond to the migration of meandering channels represented in the topography of the river valley. Also, we analyzed one more borehole in a big hollow between 2 fragments of low terrace. It is number 11. Here you can see the lithology a little bit closer, and also we can see that the results of dating can be divided into 3 groups, about 35,000 years BP, about 23, and about 19,000 years BP. The alluvial sediments dated 30, 35, maybe until 40,000 years BP. It is the end of marine isotope stage 3. Were found at depths from 5.5 to 18 meters, and in all dated 3 boreholes. That allows us to suggest that during this period, the river incised more than 10 to 12 meters below the modern river level. And this incision was connected with the increase of the river runoff associated with climatic changes. At the end of this epoch, about 3,000 years BP, the infilling of the valley started, and it continued in marine isotope stage 2 till the end of the late glacial maximum and a little bit longer. The date from the borehole 11 in the big hollow between 2 fragments of allow terraces also was formed at this time. This hollow, and presumably we think that this hollow is a paleo valley of Moksha's tributary Tsna that now flows into Moksha River a few kilometers upstream. The alluvial sediments dated about 23,500 years BP. From the depths about 8.5 meters in the borehole 3 correspond to the time of the valley infilling, and data from other river valleys of the East European plain shows that LGM time was characterized by intense accumulation of the material in the river valleys. In some valleys, not only alluvial, but also aeolian deposits were accumulated at this time. And these aeolian deposits formed aeolian covers and aprons on the river terraces surfaces. However, such aeolian covers have not been found in the Moksha Valley yet, but maybe it is the common information. We don't still know about it. The next group of dates, about 18,500 years BP from borehole 3, correspond to the time of the macromeanders formation. Position of these dates comparing to the other shows that incision of the river was not so deep as it was at the end of the MIS 3. And the ages of large paleochannels, starting from 18.5, were established in many river valleys of the East European plain before. For example, our previous studies in Don River Basin, in Upper Don River Valley, in Khaper and Vorona River valleys show the ages of large paleochannels formation between 18.5 to 12,000 years BP. But if we look back on the borehole number 3, we can see that the upper part of the dated large paleochannel was revoked during the following epoch of small or modern science channels formation, because we made this borehole hoping to date a small paleochannel. Unfortunately, this our first part of our study, we have not dated small paleochannels in this case because the thickness of its deposits is few meters, we expected them to be more thick, but unfortunately, we didn't date it. So using our new received data for choosing other samples from other boreholes, we have already sent a number of new samples to the laboratory for dating, and we hope to receive maybe some new dates before this conference, but I unfortunately didn't receive them yet. So we hope that the coming data will help us to make our reconstructions more reliable and detailed, because now it is not enough data for detailed interpretation. But comparing to the other rivers in this region, we can make some conclusions. And so our data analysis shows the following results. In the interval between 40 to 30,000 ESBP, the river Moksha in size deeper than the present level due to the increase of the river runoff associated with climatic changes. Then this incision was replaced by the filling of the valley caused by the drying up of the climate and lowering of the river runoff. That was more significant and on the period of the last glacial maximum between 23 to 20,000 ESBP. In the late glacial, starting from 18,500 ESBP, there was again a significant increase in river runoff, which led to the formation of macro meanders and widening of the valley bottom. Modern wide floodplain was formed at this time, and the Holocene was characterized by decrease in runoff and channel parameters and narrowing of the meandering belt of the river. Summarizing all the data, we can conclude the following. The alternation of high and low river runoff was typical for the Moksha River Valley in the end of the late Pleistocene. This led to alternation of river incision and aggradation in the valley. High river runoff and incision of the river were characteristic features for periods 40 to 30 and 18 to something like 12,000 years BP. And the second of these periods, large paleo channels were formed, and these macromeanders prove the fact of the significant increase in the river runoff at this time. Low river runoff and aggradation in river valleys were characteristic features for the period between 30 to 18,500 ESBP, and the most significant decrease in river runoff was connected with cryoridic conditions of LGM time between 23 to 20,000 ESBP, and the Holocene was also characterized by a decrease in runoff parameters in general. However, the river runoff in Holocene was not constant too, but the fluctuations and the runoff in general were lower than in late Pleistocene. But for more detailed reconstructions of the Holocene history, it could be the theme of new separate future study. In this our study, we focused mostly on the late Pleistocene. So thank you for your attention, and here briefly once more the history of the Moksha River Valley development.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Ekaterina. Very brilliant study. So are there any questions from the colleagues? Or we still have plenty of time for some questions. So Jeff, you are raising your hand, please.
Yes, thank you for your contribution. It's very nice to see it. I've worked also on these changes of pattern during plain glacial and Holocene, and I wonder why your dry period between roughly 30 and 18,000 was leading to a smaller meander pattern or a braided river. Have you any evidence for that?
We don't have evidences of the braided channel in our region. And it is not our first study in this region. Of course, we had many key sites in Don River Basin, and we haven't found any evidences of the braided channel at this time. But for example, in Don River Basin, they will find thick aeolian covers on the river terraces, and there are some evidences of burying of some parts of the valley by big aeolian fans and aprons and something like this.
Yes, and just one more comment. Rather, I think that, as Andrei said after the previous presentation, the traditional view that large meanders were only limited to the late glacial is now contradicted or supplemented by more data and better dated sediments, and that say that the plain glacial also showed large meanders. Has been shown especially in Russia by Andrei and by other people from Moscow, and also now it appears in Poland. But I draw your attention that it was also found in France by Bertrand, and by our research in the Tisa Valley, the tributary of the Danube in Serbia and in Hungary. And I think that's to find out what's the reason for these regional differences. And there are regions where the large meanders start only in the late glacial, and other regions where the large meanders started to form already at the end of the plain glacial. The reason for that is not clear yet, and we have always thought that it is a matter of local conditions. But I think that is one of the challenges for further research by the fluvial morphologists, and especially related to the impact of climate change in contrast to the influence of local factors.
Yeah.
That's my comment.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot. Are there any other questions? Yeah, I just have one more question. So you mentioned that you also did some grain size analysis on your sequences, and did you see any trends in granulometry correlating with climatic changes, or what could you conclude based on your grain size data?
I can say that that there are no clear differences. It is a mix of different layers of different sands and loams during all this, all the thickness of a level in these boreholes. So no significant differences. Okay, thanks. And just one more short question. So your radiocarbon ages are based on dates from charcoals, or how could you get your radiocarbon data? Most of all, it is some just a moment. Some small organic plant residues.
Macrofossil.
Yes, macrofossil.
Okay. Yeah, just of course, me as a luminescence person, it would be really nice, of course, to get some luminescence data on your sequences. Maybe we can talk about this later. Yeah. All right. Okay, we have to move on to the next talk, which will be given by Tomasz. So you can share your screen.
Yes. Okay. Good. Everybody, I hope that I can start because we have some problem with the connection.
So we can see a very nice computer background.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, now we can see your presentation.
Okay. Now you see something and hear somebody, yeah? Okay, I would like to present our study for my team in the Cyprus about the alluviation and colluviation phases in Azores River Valley. First, some words about Cyprus. Cyprus is one of the islands in the most eastern part of the Mediterranean Sea. There is the dam model, and if you're looking on the conditions, there is the very specific region where we found the 3 plates and connection, very complicated tectonic situation, and finally we have coming from this situation the general uplift. So sea is practically Pliocene, and in the upper Pleistocene, in the region of our study was about 0.39 millimeters per year. Therefore, we have the morphological, we have the maritime terrace, uplifted maritime terrace, and if you're looking on the last 2,500 years, there is about uplift is about 1 meter. And the second condition is the very high seismicity. That is the earthquake, tsunami, and landslide. There is the tsunami and landslides from this territory, and these events also we observe the influences of these events on the fluvial activity. The aim of study was the differentiation of sediments and age of terrace and floodplains on this southwestern part of Cyprus, and we want to distinguish the phase alluviation and colluviation in this Azores Valley. There is one of the valley in this part. Field work, classical. From the field work, then we have the laboratory work with TL and C14 datings and planimetric study for so very big alluvium. Yeah, Azores River is the 42 kilometers long, the 6th longest river in Cyprus. Catchment area is more than 200 square kilometers. The spring is in the Rhodos mountain, about a little bit less, more than 1,000. We studied 25 sites, and we have now about 20 TL datings from this territory. If you're looking on the relief of this river valley, in the upper part, we have the V-shaped valley cross section. In the middle section, we have the more or less up U-shaped valley, and in the lowest part with the flat bottom valley like this, see on this cross section. And some words about the river. There in the winter time we have the river, you see in the different estuary upper and middle part, but during the summertime we have the only dry river beds. And if you're looking on the hydrology, it really is some years when we haven't discharging in this river. There is the study sites and on this along the river, and there is the landscape of the upper section of this Azosas. You see there is a very narrow river bottom and a very steep slopes. And if you're looking on the sediments, what is the characteristic? There is a enough big part of the colluvium in the alluvial sediments, but if you're looking in the profile, we have the differences also in the green sides of the alluvial, but the biggest blocks there is the colluvium. Yeah. And what we observe in the morphology, in the many places or many modes of the tributary, we have the alluvial fan cut and fill system accumulated on the different terraces of this Azosas river. In the middle section, if you're looking, there is the landscape. We're looking on the TL datings. We have the TL dating start from the 400,000 to the present day, and practically in one morphological level, we have the different cut and fill alluvial bodies in this territory. But I want to present one interesting episcopy section when we have the rock wall, and in the riverbed, in the summer dry river, there we have so big boulder. There is one of the men. These men have 2 meters. Yeah. We make the microscopic and microscopic analysis of this boulder and this rock wall, and we know that is the really block which fallen down from this rock wall. Probably it was the earthquake. During the earthquake, there is the reconstruction, you see, there is this block. And when it was, if you're looking on the dating, it was probably about 28,000 Ka. Okay, we come back, we go down to the lower section. And in the lower section, we have this kind of situation. Then we have 2 series in superposition. In the lower, we have the more or less 557 Ka, and in the upper section, we have more or less 20 because there is the landslide with this kind of dating. There is the same alluvial body. Summarize of these results. In the upper Azosas, we have the mountain section, narrow valley, colluvium in alluvial series, and we have the intensive incision about 30 meters per 60 to 20 Ka. In the middle Azosas, there is the wider valley, alluvia cut and fill on different age in one morphological level. And we have the huge landslide triggered probably by the earthquakes. And in the lower Azosas, we have the intensive neotectonic movements with the uplift about 11 meters per 60 Ka and 2 series of alluvium in superposition in this territory. If you summarize, we can say that due to results of petrographic analysis, the boulder fell down from the Episcopi rock wall. The number of colluvium in alluvia decreases with the length of the river, and high rate of cypress uplift cause different rate of river incision. If you're looking at the TL datings, we can say that we have the climatically conditioned alluviation, strong general in Pleistocene in 2 phases, 75 to 48 and 25 to 13 Ka, and very small in Holocene. There is also, if you're looking on the study of the length of transport in Holocene, the maximum was 7 kilometers. And also in present day, when we have from these 5 years, the gravel of about 10 centimeters was transported only 18.5 meter. And we have also the 2 phases of colluviation. If you're looking on these alluviation phases, we have a very good connection with the Greenland ice core record, and this is first phase with the first cooling, and the second is the LGM, yeah, more or less. And if you're looking at the colluviation phases, there is the one connected with the climatic changes, climate. Generally, there is the interplane glacial, about 60 Ka, and 2 anthropogenic in Roman and medieval time in the lower section of the valley. Coming to the conclusion once more, what is the important? I think there is the very high activity in alluviation in Pleistocene with 2 phases, very small in the Holocene. And these changes or changes in intensive alluviation was triggered probably by climate, and 2 alluviation periods, older one connected with climate, and younger one connected with the anthropogenic influence. And there is my team in the study in this territory. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Tomasz, for this very nice talk. So we still have time for a couple of questions before we move to the coffee break. So Martin, please.
Hi, Thomas. Thanks for the talk. Just quite curious, for such a tectonically active setting, why are you not getting strath terraces? Surely the base level lowering would be sufficient enough to give you the terrace staircases.
I don't know. We're looking for the tectonic also, but if you're looking on the generally the tectonic and seismic activity from the Cyprus material, yeah, also with the connected with the geologists from they say that we haven't in that time the very important activity, tectonic activity. Therefore, we think that is probably connected with climate. Yeah.
Okay, it just seems that it's a you've got some really nice chronology here, but it's quite it's quite restricted in time scale. So do you get any sense of whether it's just like you get this kind of complete excavation of the valleys during certain times, and then the valleys refill again? So that's where the fluvial record is being kind of sort of recorded.
Yeah, we make some excavation, and all these you see there is this kind of the probably, or some in the lower part we have made borings also, but I don't know where there is. I think that this is the results connected with climate, and we have only this boulder. I think that is the influence of the tectonic and earthquake on the territory. Okay, there is, if you look on the uplift, yeah, we have the incision in the upper part, but in the middle and the lower part, there we have this. I don't know. Do we still you see the slide or not?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, we have the very complicated geological structure here, and there are a lot of also quaternary faults. Therefore, I think that in the lower part where you see these 2 alluvial bodies in superposition, yeah, there is probably the river crossed the coming to the depression after the gorge, and then we have this looks like alluvial fan after this day. Yeah.
Just one final quick point. Have you looked offshore to see what's happening there?
Kick point?
Offshore in the coastal area.
No, we haven't this practically we each of this section, yeah, is completely different, yeah. We 7 classical kick point in this river, yeah. Okay,
thank you. That's great. Thanks.
Okay, there is one more question by Andre.
Thank you. My compliments to Tomasz for choosing nice places for work. Second, I'm wondering what technique was used for dating this large boulder that collapsed from the nearby rock wall. The date you showed, the index of date was from TL laboratory, but I'm not sure if TL is.
Yeah, we dig the outcrop under this block, yeah.
I see. So you dated underlying sediments. I see.
Yeah. Therefore, this block lying on these sediments, and these sediments under this block has these dates.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay, Pedro, you have a question, please.
Yes, it was the same question by Andre. The method to have this date for the fault movement. So it is already replied. Okay, thanks.
Thanks. I've just a question. Did you really use TL, so thermoluminescence dating, or was it OSL?
No, this is the TL method, because there is a so practically when we prepare this sample, many samples disappear because with the very calcium carbonate, from the 1 kilogram we have the 1 milligram. Yeah, therefore we use the TL, not OSL.
All right. So if there are no more questions, I would say we can start the coffee break a bit earlier. So we have now 15 minutes, roughly 15 minutes break before we have 2 more presentations from session number 2. So see you all again. It's 11:50 German time, and you can stay all online, I would say. Okay, see you.
See you. Większy ekran.
So, welcome back, everybody. So we continue session number 2. We have 2 more talks from fluvial archives located in Poland and also the Belarus area. And so, Christoph, you can share your screen and unmute yourself.
Oh, do you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you properly. Thanks.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Okay, I now share my screen. Okay, do you see my presentation?
Yes, we can see your presentation. Thanks.
Okay. So, can I continue?
Yes, please.
Okay. Good morning. My name is Krzysztof Żurek, and I am a PhD student from the Jan Kochanowski University. I have honor to invite you to listen to the presentation entitled "The Brzozówka River Valley Development Based on Paleogeographic and Geographic Method." This research are a part of a wider paleo-environmental study in the northeastern Poland, which I carry out as a part of my doctoral dissertation. So the main goal of this research is to define the human-environment relationship for the settlement network of Bronze Age object, which was discovered in this area in 2017. Okay, so sorry for this long start. The main aim of this presentation is the recognition of the structure and relief of the Brzozówka River and its tributary Biebła, and also reflection of climate change and human impact in sediments and relief. We use many methods to investigation this problem. The research area is located in the northeastern Poland, in the Podlasie voivodeships. The main features on the relief of this area were shaped during the last 2 glaciation: Middle Polish glaciation in Warta cold stage that shaped the landscape, and the Wistulian glaciation, which developed it in periglacial conditions. In the Pomeranian phase of this last glaciation, the Brzozówka Valley was one of the southern outflow of the meltwater roads and sand spreading probably, and evolved during the late glacial and Holocene. In details, the research area is located at the Brzozówka Valley. This river is a 4th order river, left bank tributary of Biebrzα River. It's other feature river with meandering pattern and currently flow nowhere. The Biebła River is the 5th order river, and it is a left tributary of Brzozówka River. Biebła River is a strongly anthropogenic transformation in 2000th century, and present day it's has canalized. Geologically, the Brzozówka River and Biebła River valley are covered by pits and sandy muds. They are limited by Pleistocene tills. Brzozówka and Biebła River are between two belts of moraine uplands, and the rivers used shallow depression. From the from the archaeological map of Poland data, the data shows that the area are inhabited and used by human mainly in the Bronze Age. This is the geological cross-section of Biebła River. It consists of 8 boreholes in 2 meters length. The valley has an uneven bottom made of sands and gravels. 2 sections selected, which different structure could be distinguished. The north section with sandy and sands and gravels is very shallow and covered only a layer of peaty silts up to 0.4 meters. And the center of the riverbed, the top of the sands and gravel surface is much lower. The segment is filled by the peats, and we can distinguish several depressions. They can be interpreted as paleo channels. We can distinguish three stages of the accumulation of organic matter: the P3A boreholes. First series with peaty silts 5 to 20% organic matter, which started accumulated at about 9,000 BP. The next in Atlantic period from 7,078 BP peats with organic substance content of 50 to 60%, and the last change after 3,600 BP when the content of the clay in peats clearly increased, and we see the drop of organic matter to 40%. The Biebła River is related with the Brzozówka River. This is the main river of this microregion. In the Brzozówka River, the peats accumulated much later. The start of accumulated of organic matter starts about 10,000 BP. In this river, we can distinguish three sections. The first sand and gravel section, which built Zander Taras. wide peat plain and narrow meander belt. Conclusion: 2 levels sands and gravel series occurred in Biebła Valley floor are recorded of erosion phase that took place after the Warta cold station in the Emion interglacial or in younger Pleistocene and late Pleistocene period. About 2 kilometers to 100 meters wide erosion cut in both valley was filled with ascent series. The thinning upward sequence was already assembled under the condition of a gradual concentration of flows and the transformation of central system. Organic drops in the bottom of the paleochannels dated at about 9,077 to 9,900 pp. In the Holocene River had a meandering pattern. There has been a development of peat bog, full afforestation in the Atlantic dated to 7,780 pp. The soil erosion in the catchment area content of the organic matter valley slope reach 18%, and in the valley axis it exceed 50% increase in clay content of peats, increased flood episode. Sand gravels and sandy gravels layer are evidence of catastrophic event, and human activity in the catchment area began in subboreal. 5 of the Bronze Age archaeological sites in the lower part of the river basin occurred. There is a marked decrease in the content of organic matter in the pit since 3066 BP, evidence of deforestation of the catchment, probably by Lusitian unfair culture. Deforestation caused soil erosion, and the washed out material was delivered to the river bed. Depression of the river floodplain as overbank sediment comes to a mineral admixture in pits. Near the riverbed is almost 50 to 60%, and future from the riverbed in drops to 30 to 40%. Anthropogenic changes in the water side in the catchment also caused an increase of the flood size. Higher step from the gravel sands areas. Peaty silts covering this step are the result of increased overbank accumulation and washout material from the forest valley slopes during the substance. Thank you for your attention, and in this place I was excused for my speech. I am a little sick, and thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot for your nice presentation. So we still have a few minutes for questions. Are there any questions? Okay, so obviously there are no questions. So so I would suggest that we directly move on to the next talk, which is given by Marcin. Hi, Marcin.
Yes, hi.
Nice to see you. So you can share your screen.
First of all, Krzysztof, you need to stop, okay?
Yeah. Now it should work.
Just wait a second. Yes, I think it's okay now. Could you confirm it's okay, Toby? Can you see it?
No, I still cannot see it. So you should be able to share your screen, but I still only can see the
Just wait a second.
participants. Now it's working. Yeah. Now I can see it. Thanks.
Okay, that's great. That's great. First of all, I would like to say a couple words. I would like to apologize because I wasn't able to connect in the morning because I was doing my MRI test. I'm not feeling good. I'm quite dizzy and sick. So if I will disappear, Toby, please give the voice to Tomasz and he will continue the presentation. He will finish it. But I hope I will manage it, and couple of minutes I will focus as much as it possible. And for more pleasant situation, I'm really glad that I could hear and see all the flag members that I know. I would like to say hello for all of you and for all our new colleagues on this conference. Okay, so let's say a couple words about the reflection of climate changes in selected valleys in Poland and also in Belarus. It's very important for me and for Tomasz because it was good opportunity for Tomasz to go back to Belarus since many years when he was studied the river valleys in this area. Let's have a look where our research area is. The first will be the Lipsk site. It's in the northeastern part of Poland, and it's strictly connected with the archaeological site because this part of this work is part of the geoarchaeological survey and the environmental archaeology. So we do some research with the close connection with our colleagues, archaeological colleagues, about the origin and development of Biebrza. Krzysztof, he said a couple words. For us, most important thing is that during the Warta ice sheet, this whole area was covered by ice sheet, and one of the origin is about to melt out of this called Warta stage. And the next thesis is that this valley was built by erosion water from the Vistulyan ice sheet. So we will focus on that, but I will say a couple words later. And this Lipsk site, which is located most on the north, is part of the research that I continue during my PhD work and also continue in the next years. So we are in the most northern part of the very large Biebrza Valley. We must admit that this is the also part of the Biebrza National Park, so it's not so easy to encroach and to do some research in this area. When we have a look on the topographical map, we can see that we are dealing with small elevation. We will have a look at it later and we'll be closely analyze it, but also we are on the forestry area. So it's not so easy to get to this area and to do some research. And also it's important that we are in a close vicinity of the present day Biebrza River. When we have a look on the geological map, this is the part of the detailed geological map. We are dealing with some elevation, which is built by Aeolian Sound. This was the first work to do to confirm it or to decline this thesis, and all this area is covered by pits with very close vicinity of the Biebrza River. And you can see also we are dealing with some drainage system in this area. When we have a look on the digital elevation model and the location of the boreholes, we can see that this elevation is something about 2 or maybe less than 2 meters elevated when we compare it with the very wide flat plain. And you can also see the location of archaeological trench and also our geological boreholes. The most important will be L22, which is on the northwestern part, and L20 on the south eastern part. And also what is on the corner from the right side, it's the floating mud. And last year, it wasn't as easy for all of us. But it was a strange situation because not only the COVID caused that we cannot go to the field, but also very high groundwater level. This floating mud, as you all know, is very dangerous for people who try to do some research on it. It's better to do it in the winter, but in the summer, all this area was covered by water. Water is supposed to be under this mud, but in this year, and the rangers from the park, they said that this situation is unusual. It's from the decades they didn't see so high groundwater. The thickness of pits here is more than 600 centimeters because we use only the hand drillings. We didn't have such a equipment, just like a Katarina show us the UAS with the large drilling, but we have only the small drills. And we didn't reach the bottom of it. We say that, okay, we'll do it in the next year. But in the next year, the groundwater level is so high that it's really impossible to encroach. But we do some research, and the most important thing in this borehole 22, and this, which is from the northwestern part of this elevation, the bottom part is also, of course, most important. We pick up some samples, and on the sandy sediments, we collect samples C14. It was dated on 7.6 thousand before present, and also we find traces of sandy pits with some sands inside. And after detailing analysis, we must admit that those sands that belong to the Aeolian sediments. So now we know the origin. In the previous version, we didn't know that. And after that event, we find also, we do the C14 date, and the results are something about 7,000 years before present. And that was the northern part. And now let's go to the southeastern part. And this borehole, this profile L20 is much deeper than the previous one. Here we have more than 500 centimeters. I know that it's nothing comparing to our colleagues when you do the 30 meters, 50 meters, but it's enough for us because we can say when starts the accumulation of pits in this area, and we date it on something about almost 10,000 years before. We know that dates previously because Piotrek showed us large macromeanders in Wisna basin, and those dates are quite similar to them, but we are not still sure, is it macromeander or is it a different kind of river. And we also have between those two phases, we also have the sediments with sands, and in this case we are also dealing with the Aeolian sediments. And then after that event starts the accumulation of understood pits dated 7.3 thousand years before present. And when we have a look on the top of this elevation, we can see that those samples, this yellow color is fine-grained sand and medium-grained sands, and we can say that there is almost 0, maybe couple percent of clays and couple percent of silts. So this sediment belongs to the Aeolian sediment. When we compare the skewness to the standard deviation, it's in the symmetrical and moderately well sorted, so we can connect them with the Aeolian sediments. It's probably from the, and this sediment between those two phases, this Aeolian sediment is probably connected with this elevation. But we also do some detailed boreholes using geological pike, and we stick it to the pits, and we can say that the mineral bottom of our elevation, that this elevation is rooted under the pits, and this mineral bottom, it's not straight line, but we can find some traces of the maybe the remnants of braided river alluvial floodplain. Perhaps we need to confirm that, but our first thought is that we are dealing with some kind of fluvial activity here. And when we have a look on our location, we are in the close vicinity of the last glacial maximum, the water flowing through the Haciłówka at that time. We also must admit that we are dealing with very quite big dam lake near Grodno, and the outflow starts from this dam lake to Pripylina, Nurka, of course to Biebrza, but also in the next phase from the northern, from the upper Niemen, starts the outflow through our research area, and perhaps we have to check it, we have to study it more detailed, but perhaps at that time this could be the part of the braided river alluvial floodplain, because we find traces on the northern part, some abundant channels also in the eastern part. So this could be the braided river. We need to check it, because in the present day situation, the Haciłówka flow to the Volkuszanka, so there's no connections, only some drainage system. So maybe in the past this was the part of the braided river system, but unfortunately due to this high groundwater, we wasn't able to do some new boreholes in this area. And now let's have a look on the next side from the Belarus. We are near Pripyat Valley, so we'll look at the Sporowo side. Unfortunately, due to the very hard political situation on the border between Poland and Belarus, there's some kind of emergency state. It's not the martial law yet. We hope it won't be, but now it's the emergency state, and it is possible to visit the Belarus, not only the COVID situation, but more to the political situation. But we'll present our latest research, and let's move to the Sporowski Lake, Sporowski Reservoir. This is the line of our geological cross section, and we are cutting the present day Jaszelda River, and also we find traces of some abundant channel. And first of all, let's have a look on the cross section, on the schematical cross section, and we will focus on the Sporowo 2 profile, because on the bottom of this profile we find traces of Gytia sediments that show us that this lake, this reservoir in the past was much larger than in the present day. And let's have a look on the sediments. We can see that the bottom sediments are clearly different than our sediments on the top. And when we compare them using sedimentological analysis, we can say that on the bottom we are dealing with Gytia sediments, and these sediments are lying on the fine-grained sands, which is probably the remnants of the fluvial glacial plain. And we have also some C14 datings, and we can say that the pits, the accumulation of pits, starts something about 8.2 thousand years before present on the top of this Gytia sediments. Then we have a date 5.1 almost thousand years before present, but we are thinking that this date could be the wrong date, because on the top we are dealing with 5.6. Why this date is bad and this date is good? Because when we compare with palynological analysis that was made by our colleague Dimar Cwirko, and this date correlate quite well with the pollen analysis. So that's why we are thinking that this 5.6 is good, that 5.2 was mixed with the younger sediments, or something else could go wrong with this dating, and this palynological analysis confirm our thesis in this case. And let's have a look on the archaeological site. It's called Kakorica, and this site was analyzed by our colleague from Belarus, from Mikołaj Krwalewicz. And what is most important from the environmental point of view, that we are dealing with several boreholes in this area, but most important for us is the borehole Kakorica 8, which is on the south, and depression on the southern part of this site. And also the second which is also for us very important, is the Kakoryca 4. It's almost in the, not almost, it's in the close, it's in the vicinity of present-day Jasielda River. And when we have a look on the lithological diagram from those profiles, we can say that the accumulation of organic sediments in Kakoryca Ocean is on the southern part, it's on the depression in this sandy elevation, and this date gives us something about 6,000 years. The same humid event could cause the accumulation of pits in the close vicinity, in the vicinity of the present-day Jasielda River. This humid period could be so strong that the accumulation of pits in this depression starts almost in the same time. And after that event starts the accumulation of undisturbed pits until the 5,000 years before present. And in that time, from this profile, we could say that this date could be connected with the disappearing of this Oxbow Lake, because after that time we are dealing with undisturbed accumulation of pits. And to conclude everything, we must say that based on the preliminary analysis from Lipsk site, because we need to do some more research, we can say that this elevation is a dune, and we can say that in both sites we can date the beginning of pit accumulation. At Lipsk site, it was something about 10,000 years before present. We was talking about similar dates in the braided river system, just like Piotr said previously. And in Sporovo, we are dealing with something about 8.2. This could be the first, the older phase of pit accumulation. After the 7,000 starts the accumulation of undisturbed pits in the Lipsk, in the Lipovo site, and then in Sporovo, this date is connected with the 5.6. This could be the younger, the second phase. And now we know the origin of the sediments between those two phases. At Lipovo sites, it's connected with the Aeolian activity. Such activity we also observe within the different archaeological sites in Biebrza Valley. And in this site, in Lipsk site, we are dealing with two phases of pits grow, the older in Prebor-Atlantic and the younger in Atlantic period. And those phases could be connected with the morphogenetic processes activity. And it's quite good correlate with other sites in Biebrza Basin. And the changes of sedimentation which we observe in the Sporovo reservoir, it's not exactly connected with the regional condition, but it could be connected with the local, very local situation and changes of the Jasielda riverbed. Based on the analysis that Tomasz present in Yemen, and also Piotr present in Yemen floodplain, we can say that this phase is very well known. It's shown by the dead and fallen trees and also the fluvial activity and changes of the riverbed. We also know that this phase is well known in Wisna Basin. Piotr also present this macromeander, which was dated something about 10,000 BP, and on the Calcareous Getia starts the accumulation pits since that date. In Jasielda, we are dealing also with similar situation when the pit starts, the accumulation of pits starts something about 6.2 thousand years before present, and the same humid period caused the appearance of the pits in the depression near the Kakoryca 4 site in the KO Ocean, KO8. I'm sorry, I'm in the bad conditions, 8, not ocean, sorry. And it's caused by this event. And also in Sporovo too, this paleo channel could be still active and Atlantic period even up to 5.6 thousand years before present. And later Jasielda river flow near archaeological sites, the present day situation. And this could also cause the changes in the sedimentation in the KO4 profile, and since that day starts the accumulation of undisturbed peats. Okay, so thank you for your attention.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Marcin, for this really, really nice and extended presentation. Really great. So, are there any questions from the audience? I just have one question. Maybe I missed it somehow in your talk. So the period of Aeolian activity you classified, to which time period did you constrain this?
Yeah, it's supposed to be more detailed analyzed by me, but due to my condition, maybe I forgot about it. Okay, so when we are dealing with this elevation between this date, this C14 date, and the next one, this is the Aeolian activity. It's a small, very small amount of sands. It's visible here. It's small amount of sands, and when we compare those sands with sands from those boreholes, the measurements were almost the same, that we are dealing with almost the same sediments. So that's why we thought that here we are dealing with Aeolian activity, and this Aeolian activity was between, from that part of the archaeological site, it was after 10,000, which is normal because here is the date 7.6. So more probably it's the activity between 7.6 and 7,000, more and less, or 7.3. So something about that. We have to do some more research for that, but this is the preliminary thought that we are now.
Okay, thanks a lot. Do you have some vegetation or pollen data from this time period from
No, not yet, because when we have a look on this floating map, my plan on this year was that I will do 10-meter drill and do some borehole here and do the pollen analysis, and also I hope that we find some traces of for carpology, etc. But I think this year is not a good time due to the groundwater level. But I don't know what will be in the next year. It's obviously it's impossible to encroach on it.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, any further questions? It seems not. So we come to an end with session number 2, and I think we switch directly to session number 3. So thanks again for all the speakers and contributors for the session. And yeah, so I will hand over to the next chair, right?
Yeah, as Alessandro Fontana is busy at the university, and Tomasz Kaliski was so kind to agree to convene this session from the very beginning. Thank you, Tomasz. Please take on.
Okay, thank you very much. We start from the first session. It is mid-early Quaternary and late Cenozoic fluvial archives. And the first speaker will be Da Silva Guimarães. Yes? Yes. Okay.
Yes, that's right.
Welcome. Okay.
Thank you. So I start sharing my screen.
Your name is good pronunciation in my
Yes, Guimarães. Yeah, you pronounced very well.
More or less. Okay.
All right, I assume that everyone can see my screen and also hear me, right? So if that's the case, I will start it. Hello, everyone. My name is Everton. I'm a PhD candidate at the Universiteit Amsterdam, and I'm working in close collaboration with the Geological Survey of the Netherlands, TNO. My research is entitled The Impact of the Mid-Pleistocene Transition on Meuse River Terraces in the Southern Netherlands, So my research is also part of an international training network called Source to Sink for Future. And in this network, we are mainly interested in understanding the environmental signal propagation in source to sink systems. And in my case, in specific, I'm interested in understanding the mid-Pleistocene transition signal that can be stored in the Meuse terraces. So before I start talking more about my research, I will give a brief overview about the Meuse River, also the Meuse terraces and the mid-Pleistocene transition. So the Meuse River is a rain-fed river with a catchment area of about 30,000 square kilometers, and it crosses 3 different countries. So starting in France, crossing Belgium, and then it finally reaches the Netherlands. All this course is about 900 kilometers long. And it's important also to mention that along this course, 3 different geological domains are crossed. So it crosses the northeastern margin of the Paris Basin in France, and then it crosses the Hercynian Ardennes Massif, mainly located in the Belgian territory, and then it finally reaches the Cretaceous and tertiary sediments of the Netherlands. So the terraces in my study site, they're mainly located between the areas around Liège and Maastricht. Up to now, more than 30 terrace levels have been identified, and these terrace levels can be subdivided in 4 different major groups. These are starting from the highest and oldest group. We have here the East Meuse Valley terraces represented by the red colors. And then we have the higher terraces, yellow colors, middle terraces, green colors, and finally the lower terraces, the blue color. The terraces can also be divided according to the tectonic setting they are exposed to. So in this region highlighted in your screen, the terraces are mainly exposed because they are subject to an uplift controlled area. They are most of the cut and fill type, and they are also covered by periglacialous deposits. And then if we walk downriver of Maastricht, we're going to eventually reach the Ruhr Valley Graben. And as the name suggests, this is a subsidence controlled area. This graben is bounded by the pale boundary fault zone and the Feldbies fault zone. And the terraces here are mostly buried, and from times they are also stacked upon each other. So the Meuse terraces have been investigated for decades already, and different authors propose different chronostratigraphy. It's important to have a good age control because in this way we can better understand the history of the regional tectonics in this area, and we can also better understand how climate cycles might affect the Meuse River system. So in this case, in this table, we can see, for example, Vandenberg in 1996 has proposed different ages according to a climate cyclicity. Some other authors had a different approach, and they decided to do numerical ages for specific terrace levels. I also made sure to highlight here in this table the terraces that represent the mid-Pleistocene transition. They all belong to the higher terraces, and they go from the level Hertraud 1 to Petersberg 3. But what exactly is the mid-Pleistocene transition? So very briefly, this was a global climatic event that took place around 1250 K and persisted until 700 K. In this transition, significant changes in the climate cycle happened. So before the transition, we had mostly symmetrical, low amplitude, 41,000 41,000 years climatic cycle. And after it changed, we had a more asymmetrical, high amplitude, 100,000 year cycle. One of the main products of this transition is that the cold periods have become even colder and also longer. And therefore, we had actually a general increase in global ice volume. So with this significant transition in climate, we expect to find a signal stored, an environmental signal stored in the Meuse terraces. Therefore, one of our main questions is, what is the signal generated by the mid-Pleistocene transition and how can we identify them? So what could be the signal? Could it be a difference, for example, in the grain size distribution, in the thickness of the terraces? How can we find different sedimentary and depositional trends in different terrace levels? And if this is the case, can we find these trends according to the terraces that have been formed before the mid-Pleistocene transition? And can we find differences in the terraces that have been formed after the mid-Pleistocene transition? And also related to that, we also want to understand if the mid-Pleistocene transition has also affected not only the formation of the terraces, but also the subsequent incision of the terraces. So in order to answer those questions, we are applying a combination of 3 different methods. So first, we're doing the terrace mapping. So we are putting together, we're compiling different already published material, making one single map. And for that, we're complementing the results with the analysis of 2 meters resolution DEM. And in this DEM, we also apply a tool called Terrace Extractor Tool, which is a semi-automated tool that is based on user-defined parameters. And what this tool basically does is to search the entire DEM and look for potential terrace surfaces. We complement the results of this mapping with a borehole database. So we have access to a borehole database with more than 1,000 single data points. And with this database, we can retrieve information about grain size, terrace geometry, the height of top and base of the terraces, also information about quartz and gravel content, and so on. And with this data, we also we're going to age date the terraces. So we are especially interested in dating the terrace group's transition. And for that, we're going to apply cosmogenic nuclides. So especially the baryo-isochrone method, which uses the paired isotope of aluminum-26 and beryllium-10. So here's some very preliminary results. I just want to show how we're doing the compilation of the already published data. So for example, here in this figure, we can see that Felder and Bosch in 1989 has mapped the single unit highlighted in your screen as the Kaberg level, one single level. But then in 1996, Vandenberg, using a different approach, he was actually mapping the terraces based on the top of the terraces. He found 3 different levels for the same unit. And here, something similar. So here in this purple area, we see the area that was mapped by Felder and Bosch in 1989. And these red patches here are fragments of the East Meuse Valley terraces that were mapped by Makar in 1938. So once again, I'm just putting everything in one single map. And one thing that is interesting here is that by using the Terrace Extractor tool, this tool has suggested that these areas in pink color could be potential terraces. And in this case, the results by this tool have matched quite well with what has been mapped already. So that's a positive result for this tool. Another example by using this tool is that in this area highlighted in your screen, we see one single terrace level, and the tool suggested that there could be an extension of this level. So in order to confirm that, we have a data point of a borehole here. So I checked the information in this borehole, and indeed, this is a terrace. So the topmost unit belongs to the Beicht information, which is exclusively Meuse terrace deposits. So then we could extend the area of this terrace level. So once again, showing the results by applying this tool. Here we can see a general result. And I know it's quite messy, but of course, this is a semi-automated tool, so we have to filter the results. So for example, here, once again, we can see that the results were positive. The tool suggested that there could be potential terraces in place where terraces have been mapped, and it even respected the geometry of the terraces. However, here in figure B, we had a negative result. The tool had not recognized at all the terraces in this area, even though we know that there are terraces there. So a reason for that could be that I misapplied the parameters by using this tool, or it could be that the geomorphic setting of this area could be slightly different and the tool cannot recognize that as a terrace. Here, just want to show an example of how the borehole database looks like. So that's the extension of the database. Each one of these single black dots is one borehole. And here in the profile A to A prime, I just want to show you what we can quickly retrieve by applying this borehole database. And here's the result. So a very schematic profile where we can quickly retrieve information on the top, or the height of the top of the terraces and also the base, and we can have a rough idea about the geometry and the distribution of the terraces in the landscape. And here also one example of what we can retrieve from the boreholes. So we have information on the lithology, on the grain size, and when the borehole is already interpreted, we can also have information on the lithostratigraphy. All this information is freely accessible at this website, which is managed by the Geological Survey of the Netherlands. So now coming to the sampling campaign, we have been sampling because, like I said before, we are also applying cosmogenic dating techniques. So all these triangles here are the places where we collected samples from outcrops, and the black dots are places where we collected samples from sediment cores. And once again, like I said before, we are interested in dating the major group terraces, the transition from one to the other. And here you can see what has been collected and what is planned to be collected still. This is just one example of where we have been. So like I said before, here's the Muse terrace, and they are kept by loess deposits. And here the terraces are lying upon Cretaceous limestones. This terrace level in specific represents the level Petersberg 3 and has a thickness of about 7 to 8 meters. And we made sure to collect the samples 1 meter above the terrace base. Here we have something similar. So loess on the top of the Muse terraces. The terrace here is the Geertruid 2 level. And what is interesting here is that we found two finding upward sequences, each one of them 4 meters thick approximately. And like in the other setting, we made sure to sample 1 meter above the terrace level, the terrace base level. And here just one example of a sediment core sample. So in these, for the sediment cores, we are especially targeting the gravel size because we are applying the classical burial dating. And for that, we actually use a bulk analysis for the core sample. And here you can see where we have been collecting these samples. So that's it for now. This presentation was more to advertise what I'm doing, and not so much about showing results because we are still in an early stage of this research. But with the results, by applying this method, we expect to find different parameters for the terraces according to the time when they were formed. So for the terraces that were formed before the mid-Pleistocene transition, we expect some kind of results. And the ones that were formed during and after the mid-Pleistocene transition, we expect to find a difference there. This would be the signal that we expect to find. And these perhaps could make us understand better how a river system responds to the mid-Pleistocene transition. So that's all from my side. I thank you very much. And now I'm open for questions, suggestions, and also criticisms. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much for interesting paper. Question or discussion? Yes. Yes, David, please.
Just unmuting myself and correcting my background. Yes. Excellent stuff, interesting stuff. Just some comments really, especially as you're still going on with this, and it's for the future, a lot of it. Yes, it's a topic that's interested me, and of course interested Rob Westerway, who was discussed yesterday, and whose contributions on this are worth a look, I think. Mm-hmm. some observations. Some rivers we know were creating individual terraces, it would seem, at even the very short and not very well separated or defined cycles before the mid-Pleistocene revolution. And I refer you to Daryl Maddy's work in Turkey for that. Daryl, of course, a founder member of FLAG, but not a regular attender these days. That's one extreme, I think, and most rivers look to have not really changed their valley floor level and therefore created new terraces with every cycle, but to have stayed at the same level and created quite wide and complex sedimentary sequences on a single terrace level. That would seem to be what's happening in the rivers in Britain, and I suspect the same with yours, because you're not very far away. And the impression I've got, and it's possibly only applying near the Atlantic margin, is that the effect of the mid-Pleistocene revolution was to change many rivers to creating one terrace per climate cycle, approximately, although several have created perhaps more than one for some cycles and have missed some out. And as you go towards Central Europe, the classic Kukla area, for instance, there seem to be only terraces forming with what Kukla would have called supercycles. So there's some very general ideas that I think exist out there in the literature before you start this. I don't know if that's helpful, and I'm very happy to supply you with any literature you need.
It is very helpful, but I would like to ask you something. Would you expect also during the 40K cycles, would you expect to find one single terra step for each one of these cycles, or this is more expected for the 100K cycle?
Yeah, I would say it's much more likely for the 100K cycles and probably pretty rare for the 40K cycles, but of course they're going to be preserved much less often because they're so far back in time.
Yes.
In the case of Daryl Maddy's work in Turkey, they're only preserved because they've been fossilized beneath lava flows. It isn't the only example. There are other examples, not many that I know of, but I mean, we clearly have rivers where that hasn't happened. I think where there's these complex, wide terraces, for the want of a better term for them, but they're not like the later terraces. They're not so discrete. They're not so well defined. And for instance, the Thames, which I'm always most familiar, has done that across East Anglia, well to the northeast of London. But there, it's all covered by a till sheet, a glacial till sheet, which makes it difficult to study. Or more difficult to study. So you're always better in the extra glacial area for this sort of thing, I think. And of course, the Meuse is to an extent, but passes northwards into an area where the glaciation's affected it, I guess. In France, it's beyond the reach, though, isn't it?
Yeah, it is beyond the reach of the glacier.
But yeah, excellent stuff, and good luck with it.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your input.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, please, Martin.
Hi, thanks, Theo. It's a really, really interesting talk. Just a question about the dating method and its link to the mid-Pleistocene revolution. So, because you're dating, really old terraces, do you think the cosmogenic technique is really going to be able to allow you to get into interpreting these higher resolution terraces?
Yes.
And the reason I ask is that you did early on in your presentation, you did a really nice kind of sort of this is the state of art of all the research that's been undertaken on the terraces in the system, and I particularly noted the two papers by Rickson and Schaller, and they had like 700,000 years and over 1 million years for the same level. And therein lies the fundamental problem with pretty much any dating technique applied to older fluvial records.
Yeah. So for the datings by Schaller, she even mentioned in her paper that these dates should be used very carefully because of the large uncertainties. So the dates by Rickson are much more reliable. But to your first question, I think we can date even the very old terraces, because we expect them not to be older than 2 million, I would say. So it's still in the range of applying isochrone burial technique. Yeah, so I think it's possible. We can apply this technique. It should work. It depends on how large the uncertainties will be. So this will define how meaningful the dates will be.
I mean, obviously, the approach, the paired isotope approach, is going to give you a very kind of sort of, broad exposure and formation of that terrace. So,
yes.
It's not going to allow you, like luminescence dating or electron spin resonance dating. If you sampled even below that 1 meter from the terrace base, that would really give you the start of aggradation. So you're kind of limiting what you can really say about the terraces you're restricting it to a very broad interpretation, I think.
Yes. Yeah, but about the place where we sampled, we try to avoid the very bottom of the terraces, especially to avoid lag deposits, So we just try to sample it 1 meter above it. Yeah, and that's how we expect to avoid more uncertainties in the results.
And of course, a lot of people would actually say that bedrock strath, that erosion, is part of the terrace in terms of the overall.
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And Tobias, but please only a short question.
Yeah, a very short question. Do you see the chance of applying paleomagnetics, or maybe you can identify the Brunhes-Matuyama boundaries that might help you to fit a landmark into your chronology?
Yes. Well, actually, we have data on paleomagnetics. They are quite outdated already, but we have plans to also apply some paleomag, especially in the terraces Petersberg 3, which we believe is exactly in the transition between the Brunhes-Matuyama boundary. So we plan to also do some paleomag analysis exactly in this terrace level, so we can better understand where we are in the geological time.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. We now move to the next presentation, Mother, about the alluvial fan archives.
Hi there, guys. I'm just about to share the screen with you, and apologies if there's any problems with the internet, because I'm located on Dartmoor and in southwest England, and it can be a bit temperamental.
Okay, we see.
So can you see the screen okay now? Can everybody hear me and see the screen okay?
Okay.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, thank you. So
yes.
There's a bit of a lag time on the internet, sorry. Okay, so I want to change tack a little bit now and talk about alluvial fans. I know there was a presentation this morning from one of the co-authors on this paper on alluvial fans as well. But quite rightly, we're very much focused on terrace records, very much in flag meetings. But I wanted to, in terms of fluvial archives, just stand back a little bit and consider what fans can add to our understanding of fluvial records. And this is a joint effort. These are ideas really that I've discussed with Martin Stokes, with Adrian Hartley, who's a geologist in Aberdeen, and with Laura Evenstall, who's a geoscientist at Brighton. So coming at it all from slightly different perspectives. So I just want to start off really by saying, so what do we mean by a fan? And what we're usually talking about here is the shape, or really the morphology of material that's deposited when it comes from an upland source, a confined upland source, to a unconfined lowland source. So a little fan, you could argue, from the recent eruptions in Iceland. And using that terminology, here we have some of the Piedmont glaciers, which again are a fan this time of ice from basically that are flowing down from a highland confined area to an unconfined mountain front setting. But what we usually mean is we're usually talking about material that's the material we're talking about is usually water and sediment of some sort. Now, there are a plethora of terms, and I don't really want to get bogged down into that, which are alluvial fans. They've been called distributed fluvial systems, colluvial fans, debris fans, tributary fans, etc., etc. What I want to do is really consider how we can use these. Forget about the name for a moment, but how can we use these fluvial features? So the first thing that we need to consider is the size. So in this case, if we want to go into the longer term record, we need to be looking at the bigger features. So we're really looking at the larger end of alluvial fans into what some people would call mega fans, some people would call distributed fluvial systems. So we're talking at the bigger end. I'm sorry that my automated PowerPoint seems to have come in for some reason. Let me just. So in the bottom here, what we've actually got is, you can actually see on the smaller end, we've actually got an example here. This is just a small debris flow fan, a tributary fan from Moquegua in Peru, which has just been coated by some lovely volcanic ash. So that's a small feature that's probably 100 years old, that sort of area. Whereas the fan on the right is much, much larger, as you can see from the scale bar at the bottom, which is 40 kilometers, in case you can't read that, which is an example from China, a big fluvial fan. And that one is obviously much larger, takes longer to form, and is going to be much older, so will enable us to go further back in time. So in terms of if we're interested in that longer term record, we've got to really look at the larger features. So if we stand back a little bit and think about what an alluvial fan is, we very often forget, or at least in a lot of particularly geological literature, forget about the fact that there's a catchment area, and that catchment area is obviously part of the fluvial record and is really important part of the fan system, because that's where all our sediment comes from. And this may initiate very typically as a landslide. So on this image, we've got a lovely picture, a drone image of a rock avalanche from basically from Chile. And you can actually see here, this is an older rock avalanche. And then you can see a more recent rock avalanche from this steeply dipping ignimbrite at the back of the catchment. And that's not uncommon. There's an example here in the top right here from the American Southwest from Blair's work. And once we've initiated that kind of concavity in the slope, we can then develop the fluvial system, which will then expand, and you'll get a larger and larger catchment area as time progresses through headward erosion and river capture. Although the size of the catchments will be limited by competition between them. And at the bottom here, this is just an example of a nice catchment here, the headward part of a catchment in Chile. And in terms of what comprises the fan system, basically, one of the things we must consider about catchments is that even without external drivers, so without changes in climate and without changes in uplift and so on, there is a natural evolution because of this expansion of the catchment area, and that has basically implications, that has implications for sedimentological processes that we see on the actual fans. Now, if we move from the catchment and think about the fan where all this material is being deposited, does that comprise? Well, typically, as we expect, it's alluvial deposits. So these are mainly unconfined water and sediment flows. And you can see here examples from a distal and more proximal part of a large alluvial fan in Chile. And those alluvial deposits may be fluvial in origin, where they tend to basically have a much lower concentration of sediment in relation to water. So if we consider on the right here, this diagram, which is from the engineering literature, in most alluvial fans, you're typically looking at high to hyper-concentrated amounts of sediment, less than 80% sediment by weight, but sediment charge. So this is an example from the Yukon, and you can see that if we look at that in a flood event, it's high in suspended sediment within the waters that across that fan. Debris flows can also make up a significant proportion of a particular fan, or the entirety of that fan, usually the smaller fans. And they tend to have a higher amount of sediment per in relation to the water. So typically we're looking at more than 80% sediment by weight. And here's a nice example from the coastal Cordillera in northern Chile. This is the distal end of a flow lobe, and you can actually see how it's come to stop as the sort of fines and water have drained out the end of that particular lobe. And then perhaps not so commonly considered is the fact that we also see aeolian deposits within alluvial fans as well. So this image on the right, these are both taken from the coastal Cordillera of northern Chile, and these are small fans in order of tens of square kilometers in size, and they have significant proportions of aeolian material both on the surface and in the subsurface, as we can see in the quarry at the bottom. And this is sourced from coastal deposits, but on larger systems, this may be from within the actual system itself. So here I'm thinking of things like the big outwash fans that you get at the front of, for example, the ice sheets in Iceland. But on smaller fans, it tends to be externally sourced. So aeolian deposits can be significant in some cases. So thinking about scale and sedimentary process, this is a case of size matters in terms of floods. And the biggest peak discharges we typically get from any catchment, so we're thinking about fluvial catchments, whether they're perennial or ephemeral, is the bigger the catchment, the bigger the floods. So the biggest catchments typically will generate the largest peak discharges. And this is some work, this has been kicking around in the geomorphological literature for a long time. So as you can see from this work from the 1970s. But if we start to look at the unit peak discharge, so this is the specific peak discharge per unit area, then the smallest catchments tend to generate the most discharge per unit area. And that goes for a whole range of different environments, from arid to alpine and so on, as you can see from this study over on the right. So watershed area or catchment area is on the horizontal axis, and unit peak discharge up the vertical axis on these plots. So small, steep, well-connected catchments generally will generate more water, more flood water per square kilometre. So thinking about this in terms of alluvial fans, what this tends to mean is that the bigger the fan, the smaller the fan, they tend to generate the more water per unit discharge and peak events with large coarse material coming down onto the fan surface. And this is an example here over on the left. This is taken from the 1 in 1,000 year flood from Spain. And you can see from the arrowed plot up there on that graph up here, at the top, that basically the highest discharge per unit area is for one of the smallest catchments that was where they calculated the discharge, which was La Rabita in southern Spain. And you can get an idea of the type of flow that came out from the picture, looking at this boulder located in the tree, get an idea of the flow depths and the coarse material that came down. Over on the right, you can just see a summary here. This is from work in Morocco. So this is to show you that across the different scales, we see this same sort of thing, that as we get increasing catchment area, decreasing channel gradient, etc., with an increasing catchment size, that we tend to get more fluvial deposits in larger catchments, debris flow deposits in the smaller catchments. But it's also dependent on the geomaterials that we have in the catchments as well. If you only generate fines, then you're probably going to lose all the sediment as suspended sediment, and you're not going to get a fan at all. And also the fines are going to be important because they're going to determine the mobility and therefore the run out distance of debris flows in your particular fan environment. So geomaterials in the catchment are going to be really important as well. So if we piece all this together, what this really means is that if we look at the smallest end over on the left, for example, we tend to find fans are dominated by, they tend to be steep, they tend to be small, dominated by debris flow. And at the other end of the equation, the large systems tend to be fluvial, and they tend to be much larger and lower gradient. So sediment-rich flows dominate these smaller fans, very coarse generally, and larger systems tend to have finer material, but basically they have generally have finer material, but tend to be less coarse and much larger and less steep. So that's basically a summary from most of the literature, and that's very much a generalization, but it does tend to hold true in most cases. So what I want to do now is quickly take two examples. These are from Spain and from Chile. They're at different scales. So in the middle diagram there, you can see I've put the Spanish example within the Chilean example so that you can see the difference in scale. And you can see that the alluvial fans, which in this case are these very small areas down here, would fit hundreds of times within the Chilean example. So we're looking at opposite ends of the scales in this case. So in terms of the Sorbas example, then we're looking at fans which are less than 10 kilometers in size, and internal relief of 300 to 800 meters. So I wanted to show you a way that we can use remnant fans in this particular case to fill in gaps on the longer term record about fluvial landscape evolution. So over on the right here, we have a schematic from a recent paper in a flag volume, which is about or shows the overall Sorbas Basin itself. And the red square up in the top right is the area that I'm going to zoom in on and concentrate on. And it's really sediments that were deposited in the final stages of basin fill, where we've actually got remnants of the morphology left, as you'll see in the next slide, but also we've got the sediments left within the final basin fill as well that we can use. Now, this top basin surface has been dated using cosmogenics at about 1 million years. So what the approach that we used here was to really, in this particular paper, which this is work done in the year 2000 or published in 2000, was to reverse the morphometric relationships that we see to try and learn about the catchment, which is most of it has gone. We've just got remnants of it preserved. And we want to know, can we use the remnant fan characteristics that we've got? And most commonly, these are going to be things like area of the fan that we can estimate from the rock record, for example. And then can we use the relationships from fans in the same environment, in the same climate zone, the same tectonic setting, and the same region to predict the catchment characteristics from the fan characteristics. And we found that this worked quite well. And we actually use this to look at changes in relief in the catchments and match it with the best fit from what we know from using the provenance of the alluvial fans and using the remnant relief and so on in the catchment areas to test whether this was realistic. And we found that we could, in fact, in this particular case, use these morphometric reverse relationships to see changes in catchment area. And I'm just going to take one of these fans, the lamella fan here, this one, and just show you some of the features of it in a moment. But we were able to show that basically this harrow fan we predicted should be this size, the catchment area for the fan that was deposited in these sediments, which are more than 1 million years old. So about 1 million years, the fan should have got catchment big. And in fact, the moment is this size. And then we have this one, which is the opposite case here, where we've actually got a much smaller catchment than the fan should have for its size. And we could kind of quantify that. And I've put a summary of that at the bottom in case you can't read the information at the bottom of the screen here. But we could demonstrate that we could actually go some way to then quantifying the amount of capture that had happened post deposition of this fan in these sediments, which are, as I say, more than 1 million years old. So in this case, the fans help us quantify changes in the catchment areas, these mountain catchments up here. And this just shows you examples here of the sorts of things that we could use. So this is from the paper in 2018, and you can actually see the remnants of those fans are preserved. You see it lovely here in the, this is the lamella fan in the digital elevation model. And you can see there are a whole series of other remnant fans as well, which we haven't worked on. But here's the lamella fan, which is this one over here. And this is what it looks like using a drone. If you were to stand at the top here of the fan looking to the south, so this is standing on the top looking to the south, and you can actually see the ridges. These would have been the original, or as near as we can get to the original surface. And we still preserve the remnants of that distributive fluvial system in the landscape. So we can predict these changes using a combination of different approaches. The limitation here, as Martin was pointing out earlier, is really the dating. So if we've got better dating, then we could be much more precise in terms of landscape change rates and so on. The second example that I'm going to look at is really from the other end of a much drier setting, so hyper arid setting, in a very much seismically active plate tectonic setting. So this is a much bigger system, around about 700 square kilometers. And you can see here is located on this cross section of the Andes on the west side of the Precordillera. Now, again, to give this a fluvial context, this is a rather complicated diagram over here on the left. But you can see this is the Rio Lower that I'm just going to highlight here, which is draining from the Altiplano and the high Andes round the end of the Precordillera to the coast. And this yellow square is actually the Arcus alluvial fan. So the catchment is up here, and then the fan, which you can just about make out on this digital rendering here, is down here. Now, what's important in this context is that if we look at the surface catchment for water for the Rio Lower, you'll see that this doesn't really link to the lower at all. So this is helping, by looking at this larger fan system, it's helping fill in the spatial gaps as well as the temporal gaps, because anything that we look at in the Rio Lower doesn't really reflect what's happening in the Precordillera up here. It might reflect groundwater conditions. So the groundwater catchment system is this black line in here. So if we're to look at terraces in the lower down here, it's really reflecting conditions in the groundwater higher up the system and what's happening in the Altiplano. It's not really telling us much about the Precordillera. But this fan system here is telling us what's happening in the Precordillera because that's where it's sourced from. So this is the rather unspectacular looking Rio Lower on the right-hand side here that you can see. So the other important thing is that this fan itself is located at the southern end of the Precordillera, which is uplifting. So it's getting higher and it's getting wider. And this is important in terms of why this fan does what it does. So if we're to look at the relationships between the big alluvial fan systems here all the way along the central depression, all the way up here, we'd get a relationship like this. If we put the Arcus fan into it, we can see it's a real outlier. And the reason for that is really the local tectonic control on that fluvial system. If we have a quick look at what we can see on the fan surface, we can see old, these have been dated using cosmogenics, using helium, to being around, mostly coming out around about 1 million years old, these deposits. These are levees, and then we've got splays associated with these levees. And so these are debris flows with really large boulders in them, 5 meters or so in size. And you can find these up to about from 0 to 10 kilometers from the apex of the fan. In terms of in the catchment area, we know that there are lake deposits. So these are some examples of the lake deposits with seismites in them. And we have tracked these boulders to landslides. So we know, we think that these large splays are related to landslide lake outburst floods from the catchment. So as Martin was talking about this morning, we can do paleoflood reconstructions. This is an example from Gerardo's summary in 2013. And we can, if we look at a typical fan, we can see that we've got a whole range of older records in these essentially terraces almost of the fan, different older surfaces of the fan, right down to the modern day. And they'll all have different degrees of accuracy with them. So the older we get, obviously, the less accurate we can be. But also spatially where we are on the fan is going to be important. So we can be more accurate with paleoflood reconstructions if we're up near the apex. So these ones are in this sort of red zone here up near the apex. So we can use these in the large boulders to actually use things like the maximum boulder method that Martin had been talking about to recreate flood events. And we found, if we do that, we find that individual splays come out at about 3,000 cumex, which is a fairly large flow. And we can plot these up and we see they come out. That's an individual lobes. So there may be more than one lobe, obviously, to a flow event. And we can plot these up and compare with other flood events. What's interesting about this fan is that if we look at both the surface, we've seen some of these images before, but also the sediments, it's all debris flow wherever you go. So 1 is up near the top, 5 is down near the bottom. Whether you look at the modern system or whether you look at the older surfaces, it's all mud flow, debris flow. And yet it's huge. It's 700 square kilometers. So this is unusual, very unusual. So why do we get such large debris flow fans? And here we've got the Arcus fan highlighted already in the central depression. So north is to the left on this diagram. And you can actually see that it's a very large system. It's debris flow dominated. And probably the reason for that is that if we consider the transport limited nature of the system, we're generating lots of erosion, which is essentially generating lots of sediment, but we've got nothing to transport that sediment. So when we do get a flood event, it tends to be choked with debris. And so we're getting really a climate overprint of the simpler catchment size process relationships that we see generally in the rock record. So this is important because if we're actually looking at basin sediments, if we're looking at the older record, just because we've got a debris flow doesn't mean to say we're actually that close to the basin margin. So in terms of highlights, and I have had to storm through this a little bit, apologies for that, is that fans can fill in both spatial and temporal gaps in our knowledge about how fluvial landscapes evolve. So they can complement looking at records in the terraces. And the other thing is that if we haven't got a trenched alluvial fan, then we've got a more complete record than we've typically got with river terraces. It's less fragmentary. We do need some trenching, otherwise we can't look at the sediments. But it means that we've probably got a more complete record. And as I say, spatially, we can fill in the gaps if we're dealing with landscapes such as the one in northern Chile. The other thing that perhaps to highlight is that when we look at the fan deposits, the actual deposits themselves may not reflect the climate of where they're deposited, particularly with large systems. So if we think back to the previous example here, where the arrow is, the laser is now, the rainfall on average is 0. In the catchment, it's about 50 millimeters per annum average. So basically the flows are generated in the catchment, but they may not reflect the actual, or the fan itself may not reflect the climate that's where it's deposited. It's reflecting the catchment area, particularly in large systems. And the other thing is that we can use these fans as well to tell us a lot more about the landscape, about rates of river capture, where the river captures occurred. They could help us quantify when and how quickly these events occur. They can inform us about slope processes. So for example, if we go back and think about those large landslide lake outburst floods, it tells us that that's the only fan, the Arcus is the only fan in the central depression that has those big clusters of boulders at that size. And it just finding those alone highlights the fact that we've got landsliding dominantly in that catchment. So it tells us about what's happening in that catchment. And it tells us about the flow processes in the pre-Cordillera. And if we're careful, we can also, if we look more regionally at alluvial fans and what they show us, the processes in each of those fans, it can then inform us on regional climate versus deformation. So again, going back to this picture, the fact that we have all of these fans are debris flow dominated tells us that this is probably a climate signature, and the local things like the landsliding only occurs on specific fans. So that's more likely to be related to the erosion in relation to the tectonic activity within the catchment area. So we can start to tease out information, which again can then feed into the information we get from any of our fluvial archive records in the more traditional sense, in other words, the terrace records. So thank you very much for bearing with me through that. And I'm sorry that I had to rush through due to some technical issues here, but I'll finish there.
Okay, yes?
Yes.
That's finished. Okay, thank you very much. Yes, I have two questions to Andre because we are late. Maybe we move the Zondervan presentation after the lunch break. What do you think? And now do we discuss?
Let me then make the announcement I planned at the end of this morning session. As we have two first presentations cancelled from the after lunch time, then we will extend the lunch time by 40 minutes. So we will start not at 2 p.m. London time, but we will start at 2:40. Okay, I have sent the announcement by email. Therefore, I think we have time as the lunchtime is extended, and I suggest that we listen to Jesse right now before
Okay,
lunch.
okay, thanks. Okay, now please question to Anne. Yeah. No question, yes? I don't see. Okay, therefore we move to the next presentation, Zondervan, yes?
Yes, I'm here.
Oh yeah, sorry.
No worries. Okay, so I'll share my screen. There we go. Okay. All right. So does that show all right? Just pop the chat up. I don't think I can have the chat open at the same time for some reason. There we go. That's fine. Okay. So thank you for joining me here today. It's nice to be at FLAG. I was at FLAG in 2017, I think. So it's been a while. It's nice to see you all here. So I'd like to take you through a question here, and that is, how do we calculate incision rates from strath terraces, right? So we've seen some presentations on strath terraces, and I'm aware that in FLAG, we're usually interested in the relationship between terraces and climate. And so we can have a look at what this means for the climate relationships as well. But this work is part of my PhD that I completed at the University of Plymouth with my supervisors, two of whom have presented here today, Martin and Anne. And I've also worked with RISO to do OSL dating, and I've also got some postgraduate awards here that helped fund this research. Okay, so in this presentation, we'll first focus, we're going to flip the traditional model on its head, and we'll first focus on the conceptual model of strath terrace formation, and then we're going to have a look at the field sites and the data, and then think about what the insights are from that data in terms of also the climate relationship. All right, so that let's have a look at the kind of the gradual incision model as opposed to the punctuated river incision model, which we're going to discuss after this. So let's have a look at the graph here we have. Let's see if I can have a pointer. Can you see my mouse actually?
Yes, we see.
Okay, so I don't need a point. Okay, so there we go. So you have the height above the modern river here on the y-axis against time on the x-axis. So we go back in time here towards the right side. Okay, so in a case where you have a steady rate of base level fall, say in this case tectonically induced by uplift, your elevation of the base level will go down as a straight line over time. And then in the gradual incision model, most of the time the river is incising at a rate that's approximately similar to the rate of base level fall. And that is punctuated by periods of deposition that are forced by climatic perturbation. These tend to be cyclic. And in this case, you can use dates, single dates even from abandonment of the terraces here and come up with rates from abandonment dating, say from cosmogenics or even OSL from the top of the terrace that approximate the level of the rate of incision that actually occurs by the river, as well as the rate of base level fall. So in this case, the uplift rate. And I just noticed in this case here, we see these times of deposition that the river bed elevation actually increases a little bit as the rate of deposition is higher than the rate of base level fall. So this is in a case of very low base level fall rate. Okay, so now let's have a look at the punctuated river incision model, right? So here we have a third state that the river can be in, and it's the metastable equilibrium, right? So in this case, the river starts planating a strat terrace and deposits fluvial gravels, and then is in a state of kind of stability, metastable equilibrium, until it rapidly incises back to the steady, the base level that has changed over time gradually because of uplift rates, for example. In this case, the timing of incision is very punctuated. It's high rate. It's higher than the rate of base level fall. And if you were to actually correlate the dates of the terraces, the abandonment dates here, you would get rates that do not equal the rate of rock uplift rate, nor do they actually equate to the real incision rates that are experienced during these short bouts of incision. So this is kind of a way to visualize the metastable equilibrium. It's an equilibrium here that is away from the most low level state, which would be to equal the base level fall, the base level. And so in this state, any change in climatic regime or a sediment flux will have to overcome a threshold before the next state is reached. And so these are the stepwise jumps from a terrace that is sort of stable in its elevation to a step change back to the new base level. Okay, so let's have a look at an example where we can think about this concept of punctuated river incision. And we're going to have a look at the High Atlas here, the south of the High Atlas, which is nice because it is unaffected by cyclic eustatic sea level fluctuations, right? Because it's so far from the coast. And we have long-term isostatic rock uplift rates here of between 0.17 and 0.22 millimeters per year. And we're going to have a look especially at the Magoon River and two sites here, site A and B, upstream of site A. And this river, the Magoon, is in the middle actually of two sites that have been dated previously, the Madri River and the Dates River. But we're going to have a look at these two sites where we actually date in high detail from the bottom to the top of the fluvial sediments in these strat terraces. And so this is an image from the first slide. Again, this is the valley of site A. And so we have these terrace levels 1 and terrace level 2, which is a bit higher here, which are very distinct and widespread throughout the whole catchment. And in this case, we also see a terrace level 3, which is higher, but this level tends to be a lot less well preserved. So we're focusing on terrace level 1 and 2 here. And we've taken a bunch of samples here, just giving you a feel of how these sediments look like, right? So you have the Strath Terrace bedrock level, and then you've got fluvial gravels on top. And in this case, actually, in this site of Terrace 2, we have intercalation of sediments. We have some gravels and some sands here. And so we've got samples from sediment, from gravels and sands. So if we plot the ages that we get from these samples here on the x-axis against the height above the modern river on the y-axis, what we start to see is this concept that we are thinking about, this metastable equilibrium, these times of actually net deposition, and then these kind of periods of high rate incision to the next terrace level, and then followed by deposition on this next terrace level. And so this rate, which is actually a minimum incision rate, could be higher even, is 0.95 millimeters per year, which is up to an order of magnitude higher than the base level fall from rock uplift, which is about 0.2 millimeters per year. And we see the same kind of stable period here in site B, which will have to be followed up with a period of high incision rates. And so when we integrate these times of deposition, metastable equilibrium, and deposition and incision over the last 200,000 years, we can actually start to see a rate of local base level fall in site A, 0.22 millimeters per year. In site B, this is probably around 0.70 millimeters per year. These rates are more consistent with rock uplift rates. But if you would correlate, say, the abandonment ages here, and then with the modern river level, you get rates that are apparent rates. They are not rates that are not rates that are actually experienced during the bouts of incision, nor are they consistent with base level rates. And so in this case, in panel B here, if you would actually take the basal age, so at the Strath level, and then correlated that to the river channel, you'd actually get a rate that is lower than the rate of base level fall, right? So you can get rates that are either higher or lower than the actual rates that we're interested in. And so let's have a look now, using this punctuated river incision model and these graphs. Let's have a look at the Madri River, where we have less constraints on the timing. So we have less chronology. In this case, we have chronology of the terrace top abandonment, so the age of the terrace sediment top. And we have two profiles here. One in the north here, profile 2. Profile 1 is in the north and profile 2 is in the south, but so there are two different sections of the river, not too far apart, a few hundred meters maybe. And using also the thickness of the sediment on top of the Strath, we can then constrain rates of base level fall that integrate incision, deposition, and metastable equilibrium of 0.5 in the case of one profile and 0.3 in the case of another profile. And actually, what we see in this particular site that has been studied, we have a structure uplift of 0.1 millimeters per year in the lower profile, and in the higher profile we have 0.3 millimeters per year, which means that in essence the background rock uplift rate that induces base level fall is 0.2, and which is consistent. Again, without accounting for the punctuated incision model and just correlating the ages between each other, then we would get derived rates that would produce an apparent increase in incision rates, which is well known as the Sadler effect, both in sedimentology as well as in geomorphology. So what does that mean for the relationship with climate? Well, I'm going to show you here a graph where we have the probability of deposition here, which is based on bedload sediment ages, And these arrows here come from the stratigraphy together with the age data, which you can't see in this figure, right? So don't get confused. Where do these arrows come from? These show the timing of strath planation here, these arrows here. And then the upward arrows are timings of deposition, and downward arrows are timings of incision. So these white dots are actually times of overbank sands deposition. And then we can actually see the stratigraphy. This is terrace 2, this is terrace 1, right? So there has to be incision between those. So when you compare the different sites within the Magoon River, so they're the same river, there's a maximum of 40 kilometers between site A and site B, which is upstream. And what we see is that incision, so these downward arrows, and strath planation are asynchronous across the river, whereas we do see actually a synchronous pulse of deposition here during the glacial maximum to interglacial maximum period. So remember when we talked about the gradual incision model versus the metastable incision model? Well, with the metastable incision model, you don't necessarily have a direct correlation of strath formation with climate. So that's very important when you start to think about the climate relationship. And that is one of the reasons why we can't just take ages and correlate them to get incision rates or rock uplift rates. So in summary, often made assumptions about strath terrace formation can lead to time-independent and inconsistent incision rates that can be misinterpreted. Whereas if we account for a possibility of punctuated river incision, we can actually start to solve for the Saddler effect, was this apparent increase in incision rates, and reconcile rates between studies across a mountain belt. In this case, I showed you the data from the Magoon and the data from the Madri. And this model can be applied with limited age data, such as in the Madri example. And with that, I'll be open for questions.
Okay, thanks. Or is the broken? Yeah, finished. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. And now, please, question. Martin, please.
As a co-author of the paper, am I allowed to ask a question?
Yeah, a little bit strange, but okay.
Thanks, Jesse. Just wondering whether you've got a comment about the connectivity of your fluvial system. Yeah. So it's something that didn't come through particularly strongly in that, we're dealing with a mountain belt system which has got a very kind of sort of strong structural fabric in terms of the thrust front area in which our study area is located. So I wonder whether you can kind of comment on that kind of connectivity and how it may relate to the model that's been proposed.
Yes, thanks, Martin. Yeah, and indeed, I think something that's important to understand is the context of this site in terms of usually when we look at flag type terraces, we're looking at downstream terraces which have a big discharge, because a big catchment area, and in some cases we also have glaciated catchments. And in these cases, your sedimentary influx is almost like a point source, or the local sediment influx from the laterally from the hill slopes is not as big a component compared to what's going through the main trunk. On the other hand, if you have a non-glacial catchments that are more upstream in mountainous areas, then the influx from mountainous, from the hill slopes is more important. So compared to the other example, and so in this case, local responses to climatic changes will matter, and therefore you get different. You have this asynchronous terrace formation, which is not directly related to climate, but also if you have lower rates of uplift, you also tend to have longer periods of strath pronation, and so these metastable equilibrium periods. So that's something to consider.
Okay, once more, Martin.
I think that was a thumbs up.
Yeah, I was just acknowledging the answer. Thanks, Tom.
Okay. Thank you. And somebody more? Yes, Andrei.
Thank you, Tomasz. Thank you, Jesse, for a very interesting presentation. And my question is, speaking on the terrace staircases, it's a very general and very classic discussion on whether it was formed due to steady incision of a river or some impulses of erosion. And my question is, how can you account for the role of bank erosion in the formation of staircases? I mean that if the river is gradually incising at some distance of your present-day terrace, and then comes back and eroding its bank, then you will have the impression of a very high erosion rate. But in fact, it is due to bank erosion, not due to vertical incision at the place. You understand my poor English, what I mean, okay?
Yes, I'm thinking, imagining this through in my head. So, okay, so if you have a deposition of some sediment on your river terrace, and then the bank is eroding it from the sides, right? So you lose some of that sediment.
I mean that, well, the river is migrating over a wide valley bottom, okay? Mm-hmm. So if the incision occurs at some distance from your observation point, okay, and it was steady, and the river, for example, it deepens by 10 meters through a very large time span. But after that, it approaches to you due to the migration horizontally in the valley floor. Mm-hmm. Then you will have a terrace step of 10 meters. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't mean that it has been formed at very high incision rates. It's just because this morphology was created by a combination of very gradual incision and migration in the horizontal plane over the valley floor. That's my idea. Question.
I think I have to think about this question a little bit more after the talk and in the lunch break. But I can say that what's important here in this site also compared to the so for example the dates is that in the dates you find a lot of bedrock meandering. So in that case, what you say is you see this lateral shifting of the river, and a lot of these terrace staircases follow because of this lateral migration during incision. But what you see in the Magoon is that because of the rock properties, right? The rock properties are much more erodible in the bottom of the valley, and then the sides of the valley are really high resistant rocks. What you see is that actually during a terrace formation, you have a really wide terrace that goes to the edges of the valley, and then it incises. And it's this different style of a terrace formation that is important here, maybe for your question.
Okay.
And Martin says that your question highlights the need to date the strath as well as the overlying sediment.
Right. Yeah. I agree. Fine. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Maybe next question or not? I don't see. Thank you very much, the speaker.
Thank you.
And now, Ocherdnoi, Andrei?
No. This talk will be after lunch break. After
lunch break, yeah?
Yes, now it's lunch break. And I remind you that we extended by 40 minutes due to the cancellation of 2 talks in the last session.
Okay,
so
and we start at...
Yeah, and we start at not at 2 p.m., but at 2:40 p.m. I mean London time. 2:40 p.m. London time. Okay.
2 hours, right?
So 40 minutes after what you see in program. Okay. Good.
Okay.
And Alexander Очередной will be the first speaker. I will introduce him because he will speak from the field side.
Okay, but Очередной will be the first, yeah?
Yeah, Очередной will be the first.
And
His
then
talk is from his talk is from session 2, not session 3.
And then will be the go.
And then will be Margarita Guyeva, Pedro Cuya, and so on. Thank you much. See you.
Okay, see you.
An hour and a half.